What's up, party people, and welcome to Countdown to Classic. This is a podcast that educates, informs, and gossips about World of Warcraft Classic. Each week, we discuss the news, hot button issues, and content of the highly anticipated Classic servers. I'm your host, Josh Corbett, and this is a show where it's not my opinion on World of Warcraft that counts, but yours. If you're new to the show, Countdown to Classic goes through your expert input on everything relating to the sure-to-be-amazing World of Warcraft Classic. Today, we're kicking off with a featured one-on-one chat with a premier Paladin PvP player. How's that for some quality alliteration? As I play my recent call with Drakova, who some of you may be familiar with, and who dives deep on how to PvP as a Paladin. After that, we hear from some more listeners of the show as we get into databases and progressive itemization, which is a great call that I highly recommend sticking around for. You all know the drill by now. This is a community-based podcast, so if you like what you're hearing, please join the Discord and keep the conversations going with us all over there. Follow the show on social media and also email me if you'd like to call into the show, make a suggestion, or just say hi. Everything you'll need is in the show notes for each episode. Now, let's get into it with Calling Countdown. Alright, we've got another Countdown to Classic caller on the line, and today I'm very happy to welcome Drakova. Drakova, how are you, mate?
Hi guys, pretty good.
Thanks so much for calling in. I'm so happy we were able to organise this. We've done a bit of back and forth in trying to work out some times around, night shifts, Australian time zones and central time zones and things of that nature, but here we are, and I couldn't be happier to talk to you. Now, you're obviously here to talk about Paladins today, and it's something that we've been meaning to do on the show for quite some time. Paladins sort of haven't been talked about for about 50 or 60 episodes now, so I'm very ready to get back into it. And obviously you're someone who has a boatload of experience with the class. Why don't you tell people just briefly your sort of Paladin resume in the game?
Well, I'm not the best PvEer. I haven't even cleared all the content as a ret.
Mm-hmm.
I've never done that before, but I've done lots of fighting. I mean, I played it. I went rank 13 in vanilla, like the actual classic, and I did that without a guild.
Oh, wow.
So I was playing probably like 13 hours a day as like a hermit.
No pre-mades or anything like that, just flying solo?
So and on private servers, I've done rank 14 on vanilla gaming. I've also just spent a lot of time dueling, mostly all PvP, I would say, if we're talking about ret especially. I mean, I've done holy, but usually holy PvE is just kind of my way of getting gear. So.
Fair enough. Now, as you said, you've got a massive PvP resume, and that's exactly what we're going to be focusing on here today. And the sort of PvE side of Paladins will come another time, but I'm so glad that I've got someone with as much experience with you on the PvP side of things. Now, what I've done is, as my listeners know, I've got a boatload of quotes to read back to you from the forums, and I've taken some time to pull out some things that I wanted to ask you about. As I said to you, let's touch on Ret Paladins first. And Ret was the spec that you were mainly running with, is that right?
Yes, Ret, and actually Prot PvP, a lot of that as well.
Oh, okay. Yeah. We'll touch on that as well for sure. We'll get through the Ret stuff, and then we'll touch on the other specs as well as far as PvP goes. So I just want to read you the following quote from user D-Lock over at, I think this was the WoW Classic official forums, who says this. It's all about reckoning. Reckoning was deep in the protection tree, mind you, not the retribution tree. If you go deep in the retribution tree, your damage is pretty much trash, but you get more CC, I guess. If I was going to play a paladin, I just plan on going holy. Paladins get the short end of the hybrid stick, but they do make amazing PvP healers. Now, I know that quote was a little bit on the offensive, but please do believe me, there's no, I'm not coming after you or rep paladins or anything. The reason I've started off with that one is I want to get your explanation as to why ret paladins may be considered viable and not trash in PvP. So what do you have to say about their damage that they can output and what sort of usefulness they have to the battleground running around as a ret paladin?
Okay, well, there's one weird thing about what that guy said right off the bat, which is when you're saying going reckoning for damage, means you need to go prot. Well, the typical reckoning spec is 0 holy, 25 points in protection, 26 points in retribution. So a lot of people consider the reckoning build a retribution spec, even though it's kind of, I mean, yeah, a lot of your damage is coming from reckoning. That is still a retribution spec. I mean, most people consider that a ret spec. So I don't know. It's kind of weird, like on the wording. I kind of understand what he was going with on that, but I'd also say it's very situational, but I would say Deep Ret does have a few groups that I think it would be better than Reckoning. And
so you're saying it does depend on your group makeup? Yes.
Deep Ret, if you're lacking on good Mortal Strike warriors, you're probably going to want to have a Reckoning, so a 0, 25, 26 Paladin. And that's because Reckoning is something that means you're going to go in the front all the time. If you're getting hit and getting healed by your teammates and getting hit by the enemies, it's like a good thing because that means someone else on your team is not getting hit, and you're going to use the damage coming towards you to do more damage back at your opponent. Kind of like how a Bear Druid or especially a Mortal Strike warrior, it's like they're getting hit. Well, they get unCC'd finally. They have a full rage bar. They obliterate someone. Well, the same thing with Reckoning. It kind of fits that role better. So maybe if you don't have maybe you only have one really good warrior, and then I would definitely take a Reckoning Paladin. And then Deep Ret would be more of, you already have your really good Mortal Strike warriors, and your main goal is to hit whatever target the Mortal Strike warrior is hitting, and to apply your damage to whatever he's putting the 50% damage reduction onto. And what makes you better than, say, another warrior is the fact that you are keeping freedom on your main warrior. So let's say it's a war song pre-made. You'd probably want to have one warrior per group, so 1 for 5, so 2 warriors in war song. Instead of taking a third warrior, you might consider taking a Deep Ret Pally, and his main focus is going to be keeping freedom on a warrior. And when, let's say, your healers get silenced, happens all the time, Holy Paladin, let's say you have a Holy Paladin and a Holy Priest or a Disc Priest, they get silenced. You're going to use your max rank Holy Light to throw a heal up there to get them through that CC. So the Ret Paladin is really, the Deep Ret is never going to really be anything more than Jack of all trades. You're going to be cleansing constantly, and you're going to be assisting whatever the warrior's hitting. And what makes you better than another warrior is the fact that you can cast freedom and cleanse. And what makes you viable compared to another healer is you can do damage, and your heals are decently big as long as you just use up your whole mana bar. So pretty much you're going to save your mana bar to assist heal when somebody is silenced. is that the most optimal thing for the most highly organized pre-made? No, there's probably better options, but it's a lot better than people give it credit. Because when something's not the best, people get less practice at it, and then it kind of snowballs the effect. So while it's a little bit worse than, say, taking some 100% optimized group, taking a rat pally is not nearly as bad or detrimental as people think.
All right. Well,
that would be my answer.
Fair enough. Now, you hit on some great points there, but one of the things that you seem to keep repeating, which I want to follow up on through another quote to throw at you, is you obviously touched on the fact that, look, it might not be optimal, but perhaps you're getting at the fact that it can still be fun. And in certain situations, with the right group makeup, you can still perhaps, kick ass and take names. Now, you also mentioned that comparison between paladins and warriors a fair bit, and that's something I want to get into with this following quote from user Zralius, who says this: I played Ret back in vanilla. I really enjoyed it for one reason. You are damn near invincible. The only thing that can screw you is getting kited. But like someone mentioned, you can go engineering and that would help. Mana burn sucks sometimes too. I remember beating 60s in duels when I was 54. You are basically a warrior that does 70% of the damage, but you can make yourself invincible for a period of time and have a long stun and can heal. It more than makes up for that 30% DPS drop when it comes to world PvP. So, my question flowing on from that is, as you've suggested, is it the case absolutely that Ret is still fun and that you'll take that drop off from the warriors because in the end you might arguably be better than the warrior because of all the other tools in your tool belt?
So there's so many things to what that guy said to talk about.
No, go for it. Go nuts.
First of all, you start fighting at higher end skill. The idea that you're gonna sit back and heal while you're in world PvP against, say, a warrior. Mm-hmm. The warrior is gonna be bandaging, is gonna be running back out of range, eating. So, you're hardly gonna heal more than a warrior. It's a higher end gameplay. Just the way he was talking about it, I could definitely felt like that guy didn't. It's fine. Most people didn't. He didn't get into the highest end of gameplay because the fact that if you think you're level 54 and you're going to kill level 60s and you're both playing at a high end skill, it's not going to happen.
Yep.
Unless I just don't know anything about paladins, which actually is one of the upsides to paladins, is that my enemies constantly expect me to be terrible, and they might not use a ice barrier or something because they just think they're going to be fine, and I hit them 3 times as hard as they were expecting, and then they catch them off guard. So there's something else. Everyone's fought a really good warrior, a million times. Very few people have fought a good paladin.
So you're saying you've got the element of surprise / complacency in your corner.
Yeah, and sometimes this allows for Ret Paladins to actually get big heals off that they really probably shouldn't be getting off against skilled players.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So it creates this illusion maybe that you can read some of that back to me again, because honestly that was just
sure. Well, another thing they mentioned is the only thing that screws you as a paladin is getting kited. Do you think that's the case?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, that's words like only, always, and none. These things never really apply.
Yep.
But in general, there's a lot of truth to that. And honestly, it's part of the reason I love vanilla. I'm going to say, here's a crazy, crazy thought to think of. And this is a lot of times how I kill hunters. People in vanilla, there's so many matchups where literally you just can't kill each other if you don't want to die. Mm-hmm. As a red paladin, if you're fighting a really skilled hunter, you're probably not ever going to catch him if he really doesn't want to be caught. The same as a druid, you're probably never really going to catch a skilled druid. But you could do weird things, say you're fighting a hunter, you can literally you could stay alive long enough to kite halfway across the zone and to get into a house. And then the only way the hunter is going to kill you is if he comes in your house. It comes into the house to kill you. But if he comes in those close quarters, he's probably going to die. Mm-hmm. He needs space to kill you, especially if you're reckoning. He needs space to kill you. And here's the funny thing is, like, I'll say this scenario has happened to me plenty of times. A lot of times I play this game where I'm theoretically fighting a hunter and I do it their way and I fight them in the open, and sometimes I lose. But sometimes when I'm really pissed off and I really don't want this person to win, I will fight my way all the way across the entire zone, get to a house, go in the house, sit there, and basically say, look, you can no longer kill me unless you come in here. And if you come in here, your odds of winning are very, very low. So what they'll do is they'll get their friend to log on their alliance character and start whispering me like, oh, you're an effing pussy, you're a coward, why don't you come out here? And it's like, well, who's kiting who? Because you just spent 20 minutes running away from me. So you're mad that I spent 3 minutes walking to a house and I'm standing in the house and you won't come in, but I'm the coward. And the whole time this is happening, I could have made the argument. It's like, look, at the end of the day, there's no better kiter in the game than a paladin. There never has been. We can kite anyone. We can bubble hearth at any time. So if you want to make this argument like everyone can run away from you, it's like, yeah, but I can run away from anyone too. So it's just the frustration of vanilla. It's not like it's like when a warrior and a rogue fight each other. Yeah, there's a lot of chances to get away, but there's a lot more of somebody's gonna die. You know, if there's no way to disengage so hard. With Paladin, I mean, let's say you're fighting a Shadow Priest. I mean, you can run in a straight line, and unless he gets his like rank 1 dot that stuns you, like he's spamming rank 1 spells just trying to stun you with Blackout or something, then he's gonna have like no chance to actually cast anything on you because all his dots you can remove, and then he has to sit and cast to do like real damage, like mana burn or whatever, smite. So if you're just like running a straight line, you like, it could literally take, it's between both of you drinking potions and stuff. I mean, you could run from Blackrock Mountain to Red Ridge against a Shadow Priest in even gear, and neither one of you would kill each other. So I guess to the Shadow Priest, he might say, oh, you're running like a pussy, but it's like, dude, if you don't run from me when we're fighting, like half of your strategy is fear bombing me and then running a maximum range and then trying to basically, always be at max range, don't get in melee range, right? Mm-hmm. Well, that's running. But I mean, other classes don't really have that option as much because a lot of classes, once they start getting dots stacked on them and stuff, if they don't go in, they're gonna die. And, like there's good warriors out there that know like, okay, I'm low on health. I'm not going to be able to finish this priest off. So I'm going to use my intercept charge on a random mob in the world to create distance so I can try to get away that way. Like, but all I got to say is paladins, don't get up. If someone is giving you absolutely nothing to work with, they're taking 0 chances and then methodically standing at maximum range all the time. If you sit there and count the opportunities you have to just walk the other way until you get to a building or shield hearth, I mean, you've probably given up 20 chances to run away. So just do it. Just don't let them do that to you. There's no reason to. You don't have to beeline towards them all the time. And in fact, that's probably why so many of you guys suck. Sorry. There's a lot of bad paladin players out there because there's all these expectations. There's all these things about paladins that are unique to them that don't apply to any other class. So when you try to play a paladin like another class, you're
going to have a bad day.
You're going to do terrible. Yeah. And one of those is your ability to hard disengage is really high because you have Blessing of Freedom, you have cleanses, and you can heal yourself and walk away. And so walk away till you get a good fight.
All right. What do you think of the last point of their post where if people are tossing up, let's say someone is really into PvP and they're wondering what class to roll for Classic and they're sitting there going, warrior or paladin, warrior or paladin. Do you agree with what they said that you'd probably go the paladin because they do about 70% of the damage but have all these extra tools, whereas, it's worth it. The warrior doesn't have that stuff and it's not worth the little bit of 30% of extra damage that you do. Do you think that's about right?
No. I mean, this is highly individualized to the person, and I would say for most people, you should just play a warrior. One of the biggest reasons for that is because people are going to know how to play with you. It's not just about how you play, but it's also people don't know how to play with a ret paladin very well, and you're going to have a hell of a hard time, every time you join a group trying to explain, I'm deep red or I'm reckoning and like what that means and what my role is in different BGs. Like you really don't want a reckoning paladin guarding a flag in a Arathi Basin. But a deep ret paladin is actually pretty good, a flag guarder. That's just one example. Or people don't understand that what comp you're going to be good in changes a lot more than, say, Fury Warrior to Mortal Strike Warrior. The comp you're going to be in isn't going to change too terribly much, where it's going to change a whole lot based on your spec, and also if you're going spell damage ret or physical damage ret. So I would just say universally go warrior. More people are going to know how to play with you better. It's going to be more clear what your role is to be, and you can avoid a lot of heartache of having to deal with stigmas and stuff too. So there we go.
Fair enough. Well, just touching on basically, if you do charge in as a ret and you're looking to obviously, maybe burst someone down as quickly as possible, or as you say, maybe you're in a war of attrition and eventually you win over time, but you're there hacking away at them or what have you, and this person says the following, and this is from user Your Dead Tamagotchi, who says this: I did a lot of world PvP and battlegrounds back in the day. I played ret and had a blast and never even had any gear from 40-man raids. You can definitely win one-on-ones. You'll shine best, though, as support utility. I will say most ret fun came less from my offensive powers and more from my durability. I could kill people eventually, but most of my actions involved healing or curing, and the offense is basically auto-attacking. So I'd ask you, Drakova, if someone is thinking, how long does it take to get someone down as a pally if I'm really going at them? Is there any burst damage? Are they going to be bitterly disappointed because it is basically just auto attack, keep yourself alive? Or are you spamming abilities that you can take people down pretty quickly at times?
So this person's opinion, in my opinion, is very accurate, especially for deep ret. Let's forget about reckoning ret, but for deep ret, if you want to be a good PvPer as deep ret, you really need to focus on the idea that you have freedom and cleanse, and you need to be really good with Blessing of Protection. Like a well-placed Blessing of Protection on a mage or a warlock can be amazing. And this is what's going to make you good. If you're so focused on trying to be the biggest killer, well, what I see a lot of is, maybe you do eventually whittle down that hunter or you get that rogue or something, but it took so much time to do that because of all the ways they can reset combat, run away, these kind of things. You're losing the objective. You're not going to be winning objectives in battlegrounds very well. And in world PvP, people are going to start seeing that they're losing and then book it and run away from you. So this person's point of view is having the fun comes from focusing on your support utilities, especially as deep ret. If you're trying to spam instant attacks to blow people up, you're going to be pretty disappointed in playing. You should not play a ret paladin if that's what you want to do. Honestly, you obviously don't have instant attacks. You have instant CC, You have instant utility, and it's amazing, and that's what makes it fun. But yeah, if you want to blow people up, that's not the right. However, that does change almost completely when you go to Reckoning Ret, the 0.25.26. That is very much all about setting up these like kill. It's like, actually, it's so weird because it's the one class in the game, but sometimes not attacking someone at all, just turning your auto attack off is literally the best move. And then all of a sudden, like 25 seconds later, you click on someone and they just drop 6,000 health and they die. It's this very different kind of fighting. So that is actually blow people up kind of thing. And I think that's part of the fun of being a Ret Paladin, because a lot of the gear that works into the blow people up build also works into this fighter utility build. And when you're bored, you can switch between them. So that's one of the fun things of playing a Ret Paladin is you have this option. So Reckoning Ret allows you, if you're smart, you're going to have to know when to be using your counters as fast as possible and autoing as much as possible, and when to literally just stop attacking. It's the weirdest thing, and it's so difficult for people to do. It's kind of like when crazy people that go to the gym all the time, they'd honestly get more out of their workouts if they let their muscle heal by not working that muscle every day. Well, Reckoning Paladin's kind of that way. You literally, sometimes it's not about DPS, it's about burst. If you can build 4 counters or 3 counters and one shot a priest, or maybe a warrior hits a priest that has an absorb shield on, lowers the priest's shield really low or breaks it, then you've been sitting on your 4 counters, you go and hit that priest one time, you just take them from 100 to 0. But you had to wait till someone else tapped his shield for you. So there's so many factors, and it's kind of funny because I see a lot of people say, oh, Reckoning takes no skill. And I used to kind of be like, yeah, okay, no skill. Like I just clicked on someone, they died. But what's weird about it is I go into BGs, I get 50 and 0, 35 and 0, 35 and 2. Mm-hmm. And then I look at all these other paladins, Reckoning Paladins, and they're like maybe 7 and 4. So I'm like, okay, well, I mean, I kind of agree it's not the most skillful thing, but why? I'm kind of frustrated because I'm like, why can you guys not do this? It's really, I guess people just can't. They play Reckoning and Deep Ret the same, and they want to get their DPS in. And honestly, it's sometimes, very often, the best thing to do is to literally not even auto attack.
So coming back to your analogy, you're suggesting that perhaps most Ret Paladins are too busy doing their biceps every day and are skipping leg days. They should vary it up a bit. Yeah, they should. Sometimes the best way to make something grow, or the best in bodybuilding, of course, is to obviously rest. I mean, it's just common sense. Well, for some reason, it's just people don't understand how to do that. And, it's just so not like any other. I mean, what other class just does nothing? And then harnesses nothing to blow someone up? Do you know how how Reckoning works, right? No, I've never played a Paladin. I'm not. It's them and Druids are the 2 classes that I've never really been that interested in. If you've never seen a Reckoning bomb, and a good Reckoning bomb, because my Reckoning bombs can hit for 6,000. Mm-hmm. Okay, on wow. Like mail armor. Like I have one shot high warlords all the time. Actually, Reckoning works like this. You can get up to 4 counters, and you get a counter every time you get critted. And then on your next swing, you get an extra attack for each counter you have. So if you are swinging ad nauseum every 3.8 seconds with a high delay weapon, then you're gonna get, he got a crit on me. Like, let's say it's a rogue. He got a crit on me in between there. So I get a double strike. I'm swinging twice on my auto. Mm-hmm. But if you just put away, like you just sheath your weapon, literally, and you wait maybe 10 seconds, or like maybe you're stun locked, or rogue stun lock you for 10 seconds. You come out of that, you can build up 4 counters,
plus your base auto attack. So you can literally attack 5 times at once. And then you combine that with something like Hammer of Justice. You have a magical range CC that stuns them so they can no longer dodge or parry. Also, it doesn't matter how slow your weapon is. So you can get someone crits you with their offhand dagger or some like fast weapon for 80 damage and does nothing. Now you get a giant Might of Minithil counter swing or something like that could hit for 1,000 or some damage. Mm-hmm. So you can get 5 of those at once, and maybe over a 30-second period by not swinging at all, because you're going to be losing white hits by not swinging. But by holding back all your swings, you're getting these counters. You can basically kill someone before anyone has a chance to heal them. So it's like, okay, so many times you get in a 1v2 and you blow up one of the guys, and the healer is sitting there with a full mana bar. And he's like, well, shit. Like, okay, that sucked. Like, I didn't even get to heal once. So all of a sudden, it doesn't matter if your DPS is lower, is your burst is so high. If your burst is so high that they just outright die, then that prevents God only knows how much healing, right? So
fair enough.
It's just, but the knowing when and how and what classes you can actually wreck bomb with, if let's say you're fighting a mage, a physical damage wreck bomb is going to be pretty dang strong. Whereas you're fighting a bear druid, you're going to want to use spell power gear and do more of a Seal of Righteousness spell power oriented wreck bomb. Or you could still use command but you rely more on the judgment. It just depends.
All right, fair enough. Well, one other point that seemed to keep coming up as I was perusing the forums was about Paladin gear when you're PvPing. So some people seem to suggest that Paladins, and maybe particularly Ret Paladins, are actually really, really gear dependent if you want to succeed. So the last post that I just read you mentioned that, they didn't even have any gear from 40-man raids and they still did fine. But then I found this post from user Kippo1 who said this: Holy Paladin is the strongest and most durable PvP healer in vanilla. So as far as being squishy, you have the best position out of any healer in that regard, obviously, because you're not squishy. But healing Paladins are also highly wanted in pre-mades and just generally speaking in all areas of PvP. Retribution, on the other hand, is more of a meme spec. It relies on over-gearing your opponents and then being able to one-shot them. It's a gimmicky spec, which most people don't take very seriously, but can be fun to play in the right circumstances. So, we've shot down the whole meme spec thing of Ret Paladins up to this point. You've done a really good job explaining how, in the right hands, they can absolutely be a force to be reckoned with. But just focusing on the gear, do you agree or disagree with this notion that you kind of need to be over-geared or, have some kick-ass pieces on yourself in order to effectively play that Ret Paladin?
Ret is very gear dependent, where I would say, obviously every class is going to get a lot from gear. But I would say maybe rogues are really strong. I suspect some classes are maybe not as gear dependent. But it's such a small degree, I would say maybe only ever so slightly more than others. For example, obviously, I don't know if it's so obvious, but most people would agree with me that warrior is very gear dependent class. But that's kind of a good thing, because if you get to the very end game, a Might of Minithil warrior is actually, he's good duelist, he's good at literally just about everything. Because they're gear dependent, you get all the gear in the game, it's, something to work for. Okay, so Ret, though, it's probably a little more gear dependent than other classes. And the reason why people have these fond memories of their badly geared paladins beating people that, is this person who said, I didn't even have any raid gear and I was beating people. The thing is, at low skill level, it's Ret paladins can destroy another class because they're going to get their big heals in. At high level play, you're not going to get those big heals in. Your opponents are going to have all sorts of tricks to try to stop that. Or every big heal you get off is going to come at a cost. They're going to be doing something while you're doing that. And the point I'm trying to get across is that Ret Paladin kind of ends up being pretty average. It's a long way to. That's a long-winded way to say pretty average. Like,
okay.
How much you need gear? Like the person saying they need to overgear their opponent is wrong.
Mm-hmm.
I think that is wrong. You don't need to overgear. You need to have about the same level of gear at the highest end of skill.
All right.
And I want to. This is derailing, but it's kind of important.
That's all right. Go for it.
What makes, if we're going to talk about duels. Okay?
Yeah. I was dying to get into that as well.
Some people are going to say, oh, well, my in-game Shadow Priest will fucking wreck your, I don't know if I can curse.
No, please go nuts. I fucking do it all the time.
Will fucking wreck your in-game Ret Pally. And let's use a Warlock. Warlock's a better example.
Yep.
Because Warlocks really do fucking wreck. In-game Warlock is going to wreck the in-game Ret Pally. But actually, no, because Ret has something unique that like no other class can do in duels, literally, which is Ret can stack resist like crazy, resist gear, because we need almost no hit chance. So this opens this weird opportunity where you can put on all sorts of weird resist gear. Also, we have baseline resist auras, so we can stack that with more resist gear because we don't have to farm hit gear. And that really, I mean, it's huge. And then the third thing we have is we can wear cloth, leather, mail, and plate. And if you just want to beat a Warlock, if some Warlock is sitting there and he's just like, oh, like Paladin, what a joke, haha. It's crazy. You can get like 320 shadow resist and still have pretty high fighting stats as a Ret Paladin. So it's this weird phenomenon where you have so much to farm. Because like a Mortal Strike Warrior, he's going to give up too much if he starts stacking resist gear. Paladin is not. And actually a fourth thing I didn't mention is some of these pieces that give resist gear are going to be like, this is a ton of int and stamina. And that would, for example, be worthless on a warrior. Like, yeah, he can wear cloth, but he puts something on with int and stamina, it's going to be worthless. How you go about defeating a tier 3 warlock is going to be, it might completely change. It might not be like a demonology tier 3 warlock. You're not going to beat him with burst. You're not going to beat him going Hail Mary and slamming his head in with your Might of Menethil. It's just not going to work. But what might work actually extremely well is just having like, especially demonology, having 330 resist. Even if he has the thing that lowers your resist, the curse, that means he's not using Curse and Agony, which Curse and Agony is one of the main things that you can't remove because it's a curse, right?
Yep.
So most of all his other dots you can just cleanse. And if you're spamming cleanse, actually intellect, like some of these other stats that normally wouldn't be very viable become viable because how you are going about defeating your opponent changes. You're no longer trying to get 35% crit chance and smash their face in. Now you might have literally 10% crit chance, a lot more mana, and they might try to cast their spells on you, and it's just they're eating their own mana bar. Their fears are constantly breaking, and then they're like, oh well, I'm gonna lower. I've seen this happen, and it's so funny. This is the funniest thing in the world. I've seen warlocks. They talk so much crap, and they're like, oh, I'm gonna debuff you. And that's going to lower your shadow resist and your little plan's not going to work. I'm sick of your shit. I'm sick of everything getting resisted. None of my fears work. Fuck you. Well, here's the funny thing. That debuff is shadow. So to land it, they have to land a shadow debuff. That's an instant cast. So I've seen that thing, the debuff, actually get resisted multiple times. And that's an expensive curse to cast. I think it's like 400 mana. So I've seen a warlock like sitting there trying to put it up on me forever, and it just eating away at his mana. he finally gets it through, and then he's able to land a fear like he wanted to, and he's so frustrated because it's just wasted so much time. And then he gets me low, and then I bubble it at one point in the fight, and I heal up, and I go back to beating on him or whatever, and he realizes, oh shit, the curse got removed when he bubbled, and I just spent like 1,200, 1,600 mana. So there's several things to this that are unique to Paladins. First thing, to be a great dueling Paladin, which you can, by the way, but to really be a great dueling Paladin, you're going to need a lot of bank space. And this is compounded by the fact that maybe you also want to use your Paladin to play Prot and Holy sometimes. So you're going to need, honestly, and this is what I plan on doing in vanilla. I'm going to level 3 Paladins to 60.
Wow.
Because if you really want to be like the best Paladin player, you're not going to have enough bank space. You're not. Because you need to have resist suits, you need PvE suits, and especially if you're wanting to occasionally dabble in the other specs. Like,
so
I don't
you just
know
have one in each spec?
That's what I'm going to do.
Yep.
It's like out gearing. It's kind of weird because I'm literally killing warlocks. Like, to kill a tier 3 warlock, you're not going to be wearing any tier 3 almost. You're actually going to be wearing a lot of tier 2. Because it just happens that the optimal resist suits for fighting warlocks aren't even going to be in Nax, hardly. I mean, a few pieces are. So at the highest end, it changes so much that those comments of outgearing your opponent, it's just not true. In a sense, you're going to have to outgear them because you're going to have to farm so much. But if there was a gear score, Ret Paladin you're going to actually under gears. If there was a gear score in vanilla, your optimal builds are almost always going to under gear your opponent. It's more like you're going to select your gear wisely, because whereas a warrior is a good example. Warrior has maybe like one way to really win. A Paladin has 2. If you can't blow a person up, you can kind of become this war of attrition character. And you can have the same spec, but just switch your gear and slide into this role. Because even Deep Ret, for example, because in Classic and compared to like modern WoW, like your gear can almost change your spec a lot more. Whereas like if maybe in current WoW, like you're never really going to be able to be an attrition Paladin if you're like Red or something. I mean, and it's not exactly true what I'm saying there, but you get what I'm trying to say.
Yep. Speaking of that war of attrition that you've mentioned now, I mean, obviously a lot of people who have come up against Paladins can see that durability, and like you've mentioned a few times now, you have this ability to outlast and, that classic, battle of attrition. But another post I've got that, because I do concur with this post, I'd love to see if you do, and I have a funny feeling that you will, but talking about, what may or may not be the hardest class to kill in vanilla WoW. And maybe we'll focus a bit more on dueling. As you've said, you've done a lot of dueling in your time, but user Vandal says this: Paladins are the hardest class to kill, bar none, because they're in plate, they've got heals and bubbles and a stun. While the stun and bubbles can be used defensively, Divine Protection can be used offensively as well. Even if it reduces attack speed, Pallies can combine it with Judgment and their ranged execute to push out a bunch of damage really quickly in the right circumstances. So I'm going to ask you a bit of a two-part question here. So first and foremost...
Wait. Before you ask that, I'm going to say, just think of a combination real quick. Remember how Reckoning is all about getting all your counters at once and hitting at once?
Yep.
So attack speed doesn't really matter that much. The thing nice thing about Reckoning is you can bubble, and you're going to land that bomb, because now no CC can hit you. So just going to say that.
Okay, no, fair enough. Now, so kind of a two-part question following on from that post, and it's sort of briefly and rather succinctly, do you agree that Paladins are the hardest class to kill, perhaps in a duel scenario? And then flowing on from that, I used to play a rogue in vanilla, and I didn't do a lot of PvP, but when I did, if I saw a Paladin, I was kind of just like, oh, fuck that, and I would just run in the other direction, because I kind of knew what I was getting into. So do you think that even for, a class like the Rogue that everyone know is vaunted for its stun locking, and if you see a Rogue, you should shit your pants in PvP. A Paladin's the one class that kind of laugh in the face of Rogues because Paladins are the hardest class to kill.
No, they're not the hardest.
Okay, fair enough.
I mean, they're... I hate these all or none kind of
fair
scenarios.
enough.
There's so many caveats.
So many variables,
I
know.
Yeah, in general, they're hard to kill. I mean, they should have at least 12 seconds of immunity no matter how hard you hit. So there's that. But I mean, Feral Druid, Rogue is just constantly won't hard engage. It just keeps sapping and cheap shot running away. And a Warlock whose demonology is just so focused on staying alive. I mean, there's lots of hard classes to kill, and I would say probably Paladin's harder to kill than Ret Pally.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
so would the answer be there is no easy answer?
Yeah, I mean, in general, they're gonna take some time.
Right.
So, and sometimes people just don't want to bother. It's like, hey, I outgear this Ret Pally, and I can outplay him, but honestly, I'd rather go kill those two guys instead of taking the time to kill this one, because he's going to get 12 seconds of immunity no matter what I do. And he might have lay on hands and he has plate. So yeah, kind of tanky, and maybe I want to avoid him because it's just not worth my time. Not worth my honor.
Fair enough.
That's not really the answer Paladin players want to hear.
No, it's all good. The truth hurts sometimes. That's all right. Well, the second part of the question was, as I said, if you're chilling outside a city somewhere and you see that Rogue come along and they might be geared up, who knows, and they throw down that dual flag, is there a little bit of poo in the pants, or you're like, no, I know how to handle a Rogue?
I know exactly, like, literally everything about fighting Rogues. I actually think Rogue is legitimately the hardest matchup for Deep Ret.
Okay.
Kind of hard for Reckoning, actually, if the Rogue knows exactly what he's doing. Yeah, you could one-shot the Rogue, but if he has there's niche trinkets and stuff that make it more complicated than that. Definitely, if someone would say, like, okay, your reputation's on the line, defeat this Rogue or you're trash, I would definitely be like, oh shit, like, Rogues are hard.
Loser leaves town.
That's in a duel. The thing in the real PvP, like, Rogues never really give me a problem in real PvP, because to kill a Paladin, it relies a lot on CCing and exiting and re-entering combat. And while they're doing that, like, someone puts one dot on them and it just kind of throws everything off. Whereas if I'm fighting a Rogue in real PvP and someone throws a dot on me, it's like, good, this is probably just break gouge for me. So, like, the real combat situation, I'm not really like, whatever, Rogue. 1v1, I'm like, oh, does he know the tricks? Because if he does, this is going to be a hard fight. And if he's an orc, it's a really good chance that I'm going to lose no matter what. So, and I want to say one thing, actually, more than what class my opponent is playing. And then the obvious answer, their skill level, forget it like that. Look at the thing that's the most determinant out of anything, whether a random person is going to be able to beat me or not, is actually not what class they are. And we're just going to assume everyone has the same skill. It is what race they are. Orc is just that stun resist. It makes warriors hard. It makes hunters hard. It makes rogues very hard. It makes warlock. I mean, it's the stun resist, man.
Fair enough. Stun resist is the bane of your existence.
The stun resist is the bane of my existence. And also classes that have multiple trees of spell damage. So I can't stack one or two resists.
Right.
So that being said, I would say really one of the most difficult classes, and I do have many tricks for killing these. So I've met so many orc shamans who think, I'm going to win. Paladin, I can purge you. I can probably resist your stun. I have grounding totem. I'm going to win. At the trinket, I have a lot of tricks to kill you. I still might win, but orc shaman, definitely like, oh crap. And orc anything is kind of like, it's iffy.
All right. Well, I just wanted to touch briefly on a spec that we haven't really talked about much, and I appreciate that it might not be a spec you have as much experience with, but let's just talk holy PvPing for a second. And I've got this one quote.
I got a lot of experience in PvP as holy.
Oh, great. Sorry. Fantastic. Excellent. That's
dueling
great.
And pre-made.
Fantastic. Well, let's touch on this one. And I'll tell you what, considering you've got a lot of experience with it, I'll throw two quotes at you. I'll use my backup quote as well. So we'll start with user Big Custard, and they touch on a couple of things that we've already mentioned, but we'll focus on sort of whether or not Holy is king in a way in terms of healing. So they say this: Holy Reckoning is the best PvP healer. Priests have more versatility, but rogues will eat you for breakfast if you're a priest, while the exact opposite is true for paladins. I have fond memories of 3 rogues trying to gank me on my pally, and I slaughtered all of them. Reckoning is fun, especially with Sulfurous. So I'll focus on that notion that they brought up of the number one PvP healer. Do you say it's Paladins, easy, done, argument over?
Well, of course, no.
Okay, great.
I'm never going to agree with these all or nones. And I
keep trying to rope you in.
I'm not trying to be a
resist.
snowflake and be like, well, there's, it's just true. It really isn't that way. But, actually, he's talking about something really weird. He's talking about Holy Reckoning. He's not talking about Holy. So he's actually describing a Holy Paladin that focuses on healing, that has burst damage and a 2-hand weapon. Now, you probably as someone who never really played Paladins, that probably sounds really weird to you.
A little bit, yeah.
Right? So he's talking about a very specific build, and I'm going to say this: Holy Reckoning is not Deep Holy, and they play worlds apart different. And Holy Reckoning, in my opinion, is probably the best if you're just going to do pickup groups with random people. You want the ability to occasionally do damage. It's really kind of cool when you're healing someone and then you turn around and literally one-shot a rogue, but you're spec like deep into healing. It's so weird. And that's really, really good when you don't have a highly organized group and you can't rely on your teammates to kill people for you or to do their roles properly. So you need a more jack of all trades. It's also just fun. I mean, I'm a healer. Actually, I feel like killing someone. I don't know. It's just this really fun combination. But at the highest tier of gameplay, there is no substitute for deep holy, all in holy, nothing but healing, tier 3 paladin. It is so good that I will let someone say it's the best healer in PvP. I mean, it's really good. In organized pre-mades. Man, I mean, because the tier 3 suit is designed perfectly to do this amazing healer, tons of armor, great utility.
It fits so well.
Yeah, it's awesome. But the thing is, the Holy Reckoning, I think is actually better when if you're just joining a queue and you have no friends. Because playing that build, it's like if you're playing League of Legends, you don't want to have 2 bot lanes with like double Taric or something. Like it'd be terrible. Yeah, that's the problem with the Deep Holy is it's best played with someone else, and maybe you don't want to play with someone else, so. But I think when you're playing in a highly organized group, there's nothing better than a full, dedicated, deep, holy paladin.
All right, well, focusing on that deep, holy paladin, let's touch on a few of the pros, and you've gone into a little bit, but I found another one from the username Subtly Dyslexic. So they say the following: Having 60% physical damage reduction as a healer means every rogue will avoid you one-on-one. Bubble means you will always have 12 solid seconds of free casted healing. One button dispel that removes a poison, disease, and magic effect is very helpful in group PvP. And a huge problem for other healers in PvP is mana efficiency. Paladins do not have this problem. That said, even with these, a healer is only as good as their support. Paladins perform poorly when focused by anything that can interrupt, or if they have to move frequently. The only instant cast they have is Holy Shock, and it costs a ton of mana. It's quite easy to isolate a paladin from his support. So, do you agree or disagree with some of the pros and cons highlighted there as a holy paladin?
Yeah, and that's why I would say I don't like the word best, because that's pretty accurate.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I mean, they have really great things about them, but if you know how to deal with them, they can be dealt with. So, and good players know how to deal with it. So
too easy. Well,
I think that guy has a good concept, good grasp on holy paladins.
Okay. I've got one last one that I apologize. I'm not sure if you've mentioned. If you did,
I'm actually enjoying this. So.
Oh, fantastic. No, you're on an absolute roll. I've got to say, just for the listeners' benefit, I told you at the start of this call, it might take 20, 30 minutes, and here we are an hour into it. And, the reason I keep going is because you're absolutely slaying it. So I'm so glad I prepped backup questions for a situation like this. So thank you so much for obviously staying on the line and being so good in your responses. Now, I do only have one or two more questions left, and then I might just ask you a couple of, things about Classic in general after that, if you're cool with that. Now,
yeah,
we've got user Ezekiel who tells us this. One thing I haven't seen mentioned specifically is Blessing of Sacrifice. Getting polymorphed as a healer in vanilla can easily turn the tide of a fight. But if a paladin keeps Blessing of Sacrifice on an ally that they expect to be damaged, then the shared damage from Blessing of Sacrifice actually breaks polymorph. Combine that with properly timing your bubble, and you are an incredibly annoying healer to disable in a fight. So,
Just as something that this is actually back to Deep Ret. And a lot of people are like, oh, when I play Deep Ret and I try to get my heals off, it never works and it just sucks. And Deep Ret, look, Deep Ret can repentance a target, and they can bop and they can freedom while still dealing damage. Whereas, you can't cast. If you're casting your heal, you can't cleanse at the same time. But you can attack as a Ret Paladin and cleanse at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So that's actually one of the reasons why Deep Ret is actually a lot better than people think. And another reason Deep Ret is a lot better than people think is because Blessing of Sacrifice is amazing. So freaking good. You just put it on the warrior or somebody who's someone is always going to be. It's easy to find that person. And now you're like the ultimate oh shit healer because you're not going to be polymorphed. And if you are polymorphed, you can bubble. And so you're fighting, you're assisting the warrior, you're hitting his targets. And then when all the other healers are being stunned and CC'd and stuff, you're just chugging out max rank holy lights. And it plays so weird because to be a good Deep Ret Paladin, you need to focus. I just got to beat it in people's heads because nobody does this, and that's why they all suck, and that's why they all complain. You need to focus on Blessing of Sacrifice, Blessing of Protection, Blessing of Freedom. These are the things that make you good compared to a third warrior. And they are really, really significant spells. Blessing of Sacrifice is a very significant PvP spell that is not used enough. And I would also say, guys, stop using rank 2 Blessing of Sacrifice. Use rank 1 because it costs less mana, and you're going to take, instead of breaking polymorph to take 55 damage, you can take 45. So just a tip. You can take less damage and still break CC.
Now, I'm not sure if you've been keeping up to date with some of the arguments in the forums, but the topic of spell batching has come up lately, and I'm thanking listener Jamie who's just brought it up in chat. And I was just wondering, is there anything in regards to Paladins, perhaps on that topic that we just talked about in terms of the blessing of sacrifice, that really affects Paladins when it comes to spell batching? Have you heard much about this? Do you know, I'm presuming you might know a little bit about this.
I don't know the term.
Okay.
Explain what it is.
Spell batching is basically the way in which information is sent to the server. So I think it back in the day it was sent in like 400 millisecond packets. So this is the way in which, you could oh god, I'm going to get it wrong. You could do two abilities at the same time if your sort of reaction times were quick enough. Like, you're
talking about seal twisting to try to get like two seals in, or
it might be. That's why I'm asking. I'm not sure how it works with Paladins specifically, but things like Mage's Blink and Rogue's Gouging. I'm going to fuck this up. It's like, how you could polymorph each other at the same time. You have two.
Yeah, like you could stun a guy and like two rogues could gouge each other at the same time.
Exactly. So was there anything with Paladins that came up with that kind of stuff?
Yeah, it was really annoying because the problem, you have to be kind of smart about it because this leads to a serious problem where a lot of RCD cooldowns are pretty strong, but they're on a really high cooldown. So if you're trading your Hammer of Justice for a Rogue's Gouge, then you've just lost the duel. Like, if you trade one of your high delay CCs for one of their cheap ones, and you're both sitting there CC'd, then that's the duels. You probably, that's the beginning of the end for you.
Mm-hmm.
So there's certain things you can do, like think like, okay, if he's behind me, he can't gouge me. Okay, Hammer of Justice has farther range than, say, Gouge. And I know I can turn and cast backwards with it. So I don't need line of sight. So I can turn my back to them. There's little tricks you can do, and they're really important that you do it, because if you ever do make I don't know, I call it a CC trade. I never heard that term before, but I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yep.
Yeah, you're going to lose. So what else do they want to know about it? There definitely is circumstances.
That's all I was intrigued by is what sort of abilities may have factored in for Paladins with that, but you've pretty much...
Okay, so Hammer of Justice, Repentance. Actually, one that goes in my favor a lot is when I see a mage is about to polymorph me, and I know they're going to need a really, really long reset. I oftentimes cast Blessing of Wisdom on myself, and so many times the Wisdom goes off after I'm already sheeped. That's a really good one. Or Blessing of Kings, because Blessing of Kings gives you 10% of your stamina. So if they turn you into a sheep, then you're going to regen to full health. You're going to get that stamina bonus. So when they hit you with their Pyroblast or whatever, you're going to have extra stamina. So that's one that other players don't think about. Yeah, the obvious ones are Repentance, Blessing of Protection, and Hammer of Justice. But the one that goes in your favor that people don't really think about is Wisdom and Kings against mages that are sheeping you. And you gotta kind of think ahead, like, okay, am I gonna use this mana now to cast Wisdom when he's gonna break his own polymorph in 4 seconds? Probably not. But if I know he's gonna go for a really hard reset, and he's gonna go over there and eat and drink, I'll throw Wisdom on myself, and it makes a huge difference. And a lot of times, the animation only goes through, the spell only goes through because of this packet thing you're talking about.
Okay. So. Now, just one last thing to basically bring it all home with PvP. A few of the things you notice in the comments is, every now and again you see, fuck, Paladins are annoying. And just to sort of bring it on home with your, sort of general feeling about the class, no matter what spec you pick, what are some of the funnier interactions you've had with players when, they try to burn you down? You talked about trying to lure hunters into houses and things like that.
That would definitely be one of my favorites.
Do you get a lot of just at the end of the day, fuck you, you're all so annoying?
Oh yeah. Oh my God, yes. And I think we might actually be one of the most annoying classes in vanilla.
Yeah.
For other people. One of the big ones, the Bubble Hearth.
Yeah.
if you spend 30 minutes and y'all are just chugging potions and demonic runes and you're going so try hard, and the paladin just realizes, fuck, I am really just not going to catch this guy. He's going to win. Bubble harf. I've done that, and people getting on their friends' accounts just to say, oh, you piece of shit, I hate you, and just, oh my god. So that's really annoying. And then the other one is the fact that we can switch from like, oh, I'm a ret pally, I fight you, and then it's like, no, you know what, I'm gonna lose with this strategy, so I'm gonna do this attrition thing. I'm gonna put all this attrition gear, and then like maybe I put on a shield and mana regen, I'm fighting a hunter. I walk you all the way across the freaking planet, walk into a house, then switch back to my DPS gear, and then I'm like, all right, come in here. And then, of course, they're not going to go in there because they're like, oh, man, my odds are really bad in there. So that's another time where I get people logging on alts just screaming at me like, you know, you're a piece of trash, I hate you.
Yeah.
One of my fondest memories in vanilla was I was dueling this rogue as Deep Ret, and I actually couldn't beat him, which happens a lot actually as Deep Ret. I couldn't beat him, but I told him, you know what? The way that you fight, you disengage so much and re-engage. If I wanted to, it would take you, I could run you across an entire zone before you actually killed me. So it's not practical. The way you're killing me isn't actually practical, is what the argument I was making to him. And he was like, what? Like, no, you can't. Like, I can kill you under like 5 minutes. Like, that's an absurd thing for you to claim. Like, why would you say that? And I was like, okay, let's try it. And he found out if I really didn't want to fight him, he literally, I did in fact run him from, and he was on the opposing team, but we didn't use a dual flag this time. I ran him from Black Rock Mountain between my repentance, my stun, my freedom. I used redoubt at that time, even though I was Deep Ret, I was 0-18-33, so I had redoubt and shield, so I could put on a shield to get really tanky, a lot of damage return. And I didn't really ever get him low, but he wasn't able to kill me, and I walked him all the way from Black Rock Mountain to the flight path and the Burning Steps. and then he was like, wow, I didn't really, and I didn't even get on my mount. That's the funny thing. Like, he had sprint, he had, slowing poison, all this crap, and I didn't even have to get on my mount, and I was able to, every time I'm about to die, some sort of CC, a heal, walk in a direction, and it kind of struck home to him, like, in his mind, he's thinking, oh, like, a ret paladin can never kill me because I can just keep re-stealthing. And I'm gonna whittle him down, easy GG. And then when it dawned on him, it's like, oh wow, like, yeah, eventually I'll kill him, but when it takes me like 10, 12 minutes, does it even count anymore? Because in a real scenario, someone can always just walk away.
Right.
A bubble. So this kind of ability to disengage and put on defensive gear and restart fights that way has led to a lot of people like, God, you're so annoying. Because a lot of times I lose is because I'm trying to be kind of a gentleman and just say like, okay, let's just see if I, don't stretch this out for 25 minutes. And that's a lot of times, that's where I'm going to lose a lot of my fights. But in the back of my mind, I am thinking like, if I really wanted to, I could just make sure this didn't end. And when people experience that, they do not like paladins because I don't think they're really good at making things not end. They're not good at ending things themselves, but they're also good at making things not end, and they're super annoying. So yes, Paladin is ultra annoying class for people to deal with.
Fantastic. Well, look, Drakova, you've done so well. I just want to sort of end the interview on one last question away from PvP and all of that jazz. Now, if people aren't aware of you obviously, you worked with S-Band in the past on YouTube, released some videos. I was
actually streaming with him, but most people don't know this, like 4 days ago.
Oh, okay. You were just on his stream 4 days ago.
I was playing on an alias account in League of Legends, and it was Crusader Drakova. I wasn't talking all that much, but I mean, I'm still in contact with him.
Yeah. Well,
Like-
that was one of the things that comes up sort of in his Discord every now and again is, where's Drakova? Well, what's happening with Drakova? Is Drakova streaming for Classic? Like, what's going on? And so just to kind of answer the question and, you know, understanding that real life and stuff gets in the way at times, but, you seem to have been a little bit away from the scene of late. So without going into any details you're not comfortable going into, sort of what's been going on, and are you coming back for Classic?
Actually, it's good reasons I'm not. Actually, this is a crazy story. And I think would be good to share some of this.
Okay.
I'm going to send you a picture in Discord.
Sure.
Do you have you have a stream going?
Yeah, but it won't come up if I open Discord.
But I want you can share it with everyone.
Oh, okay. Yeah, sure. I'll bring it
I want
on
them
over.
to see this.
Yeah.
It's really telling.
Okay.
What's been going? I mean, it's the beginning of a long story. So take a look at that, and you can share that with the people. Actually, I'm taking a break from WoW, and even when I was playing WoW in the end, I was actually kind of setting my life in order, so when Classic comes out, I can go try hard.
Mm-hmm.
I think the last year of me playing, like actually about the time. I was more try hard before me and S-Fan ever did any streaming, or before he ever started streaming.
Mm-hmm.
I had hit ranked 14 on a Paladin. My micro was cleaner. I was more try hard, but like my life was kind of holding on by a thread. And, I knew that if I wanted to, I'm gonna have to chill out, basically. I was going to have to, not stand in front of, don't spend my hours after work standing in front of Ironforge dueling anymore.
Yep.
Don't grind endlessly. Cause in the back of my mind, I was like, especially once I found out Classic was coming out, that's when it was really like, okay, don't go too hard now. Just gather information for yourself. Be like, look at builds, items. I actually spent some time learning more PvE because I'd always been a terrible PvEer. So I worked a little bit on my PvE to prepare for Classic, but my PvP definitely suffered a lot. But the thing was, I felt like I was already so far ahead that I didn't really have to put a lot of emphasis in it to stay relevant. Because there really is, honestly, sorry guys, there's not a lot of good Ret Paladins out there. So if I just kind of play a little bit every now and then, casually, I'm going to be better than 95% of the Ret Paladins.
So just to clarify, that the photo you've sent me, is that before on the left, after on the right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So it's just for the listeners who obviously can't see the photo when they hear this on the podcast.
Remember when S-Fan, if anyone follows S-Fan, he started talking about character immersion?
Mm-hmm.
Well, it may have started out as a joke, but I took him I was like, you know what, I'm going to start a diet. I'm going to start weightlifting. I'm going to do these things. And it's kind of funny because I think seeing Classic WoW, this is sad. Classic WoW in some ways kind of made me want to try more enthused about life.
No, fair enough.
I never really actually, other than family related things and maybe relationships, nothing in my life ever made me as happy as playing vanilla World of Warcraft. Mm-hmm. And when I found out Classic was coming out, it kind of just, I don't know, was part of the reason I went through a midlife crisis at 30. Yeah. And I also went through it because basically a girl I was dating at the time cheated on me. And then combined with all of these feelings of wanting, I was already made up my mind that I was going to self-improve. So I had all this pressure and anger and anxiety. And I just used that to change the way that I look. And now I'm focusing on, I'm in a new relation. I've been in a few relationships since that one, but I've been kind of searching and I finally found someone. I'm actually engaged now.
Oh, congratulations.
I lost 140 pounds. I got a higher paying job and I am just working to be able to try hard for vanilla, basically.
Well, mate, you've come leaps and bounds clearly, and in this image that you sent me, like, it's so clear. It's day and night, the before and after. So I just want to throw out, like, you know, it's clear that you've put in the work, and a huge congratulations to you for, as you say, you know, sort of righting the ship, if you will, and reorganizing the priorities a bit, but still remaining keen for classic WoW. And so I'm so glad to hear that.
It's actually kind of sad because it's like, I told Esfan, it's like, basically Esfan can get famous. He's a great streamer. It doesn't need my help at all.
Mm-hmm.
So I could literally just stop playing WoW for the most part, work on my real life, and then jump back in when Classic comes out, and I'll be more relevant than ever without for Classic WoW without actually playing Classic WoW. So it was just a smart move all around.
Fair enough. Are there any plans at all to team back up with Esfand?
Yeah. There definitely is. And one of the biggest deterrents from us playing, say, like BFA together is I never wanted to play BFA.
Mm-hmm.
And I am not going to make streaming a career ever.
Yep.
I am not good at it. I mean, maybe I can play the game, but I'm not a good streamer.
Fair enough.
And, you know, I can make more money doing my day job or night job, I should say.
So will you just be doing a little bit of streaming?
So two things can happen. If Esfan becomes so famous that somehow he just kind of doesn't want to steal my ideas anymore, then yeah, I will probably have some sort of outlet to do theory crafting, but it's probably not going to be like a stream. I'm just going to say, like, try these items with these spec points. Tell me what you think. And then I'm not going to talk or anything. I'm going to have some sort of outlet. But I'm hoping that when hanging out with Esfan, people are going to see me doing cool stuff and they're going to ask questions and I can push my ideas. I love sharing these theory crafting ideas and dueling kind of ideas with people. And if I can do that while teamed up with Esfan, then that's going to be the best for me. And I'll be happiest doing it that way.
Well, obviously, if people haven't picked up on it by now, you are very friendly with Esfan. You guys have known each other for some time. One last thing to go out on, and I know I keep saying this, I'm horrible in that I do this in every interview, but can you think of the funniest Esfan story you know that you'd like to share with the listeners? Like something they may not be aware of, you and your friendship with Esfan, or something funny that he did in game once that made you laugh.
Okay, here's some funny one. Esfan's like 5 years younger than me.
Uh-huh.
So I think I started hanging out with Esfan when I was like 12. I was playing Dark Ages at Camelot and he was like 7.
Okay.
And I have two stories. We'll do the Dark Ages at Camelot one. I remember me and my friends, we were roaming and we're 12, so we're not super good, but we were roaming a battlegrounds or something and we were doing okay. But we knew there was a whole bunch of stealthers out there and we couldn't get them to attack us. And Esfan was like, hey guys, I know what will make them come out to fight us. And he started taking his armor off. And I remember my other friends were like, oh my God, why do you have this kid? He's so annoying.
Why is he getting naked?
He's literally taking his armor off and he's playing an armsman. So like half of your like defense comes from your actual armsman is like a warrior. So taking your plate off is like a big deal. Like you're going to get one shot. He's taking his armor off and he took all his armor off and it was sure enough, actually like a bunch of stealthers came out and he died instantly, but we ended up killing all these stealthers and it actually worked, which was funny. But my friends were like all pissed and stuff. And then, years down the road, this BlizzCon 2018, I'm like, hey guys, you remember Esfan? Do you remember him? And they're like, oh yeah. And I'm sending them links and stuff. And they're like, wait, what? It's like that annoying, like 7 or 8 year old kid that like, the problem is they always treated him that he was the same age. So Esfan's having to play with when we were 17, all his friends that he played video games with were 17, he was 12.
Right.
So, but when you're on Skype or whatever, it doesn't connect to you that the person's making mistakes because they're 5 years younger than you.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of times Esfan would get like a bunch of shit. Like, it's like, oh man, like you suck. Why are you screwing up? But it's kind of like, my friends don't realize he's 5 years younger because they don't meet him in real life, whereas I had, you know?
Right.
And I don't necessarily like want to beat it over the head. It's like, hey, he's younger, give him a break. I don't know. That's one of my fondest memories of him just like pissing all my friends off.
Yep.
And then actually now I think a lot of them would be like begging to play with him. Like they would come back and be like, oh yeah, remember me? And then, another one was, because I was older than S-Fan, I like to like fight a bit when I was younger, like not seriously, but just kind of like play fight. And I always beat the crap out of S-Fan or like shot him with airsoft guns and stuff. But as we both reached more towards adulthood, he got really into football and I got into cupcakes. Mm-hmm. So it was not a good combination because it was like, yeah, he was overweight or whatever, but he wasn't that overweight, especially when he was younger. I mean, he got to the point, I went to the gym with him and I hadn't been to the gym in years at that point. So I could barely bench something. Mm-hmm. And he benched like 420 pounds. Mm-hmm. Like it was nothing. Mm. And he benches more than he looks. It's hilarious because he doesn't really have that much definition because he's big. Mm. But
just that mass will get it over the line. Yeah.
Yeah. Crazy much. And it's weird because when he goes to the bench, like all the guys around him are like shredded, and they look more traditional bodybuilding type. And then it's like he walks up to the bench and like lifts it so easy. And he just, I don't know. It's so weird to think that I used to like beat him up. And then as time went on, I was like, oh crap. Turned. Yeah, the tables turn.
Fair enough.
Now, I don't know. I think if we fought today, he'd still beat me because I don't know what his pro agility is like his ability to move back and forth, but
I don't know, man. Those guns on you. You're rocking the guns now. You never know. Maybe it'll be a fair fight.
I'm poser strength though. Like he's like real strength. Like I trained for show. I just wanted to look as good as possible, as fast as possible.
Right. We'll have to set up the hypotheticals of the real life Drakova versus S-Fan friendly duel.
I think he would still win. I know he's kind of clumsy and stuff. I've seen it, but man, if he grabs me and throws me to the ground, I think it's over. Yeah, I've known S-Fan his whole life and I foresee us working together. The only reason I might not work with him, and I've been trying to fix this, is I had a bad habit of using foul language. Basically, what I'm getting at is the biggest deterrent from me in the future, once we're both playing a legal game, because before I didn't want to play BFA, so that was a big part of it too. But when we're both playing Classic, the one thing that might hold me back more than anything is just like my inability to censor myself sometimes. Because as people that watched my channel before, I say a lot of things. I want my friend's career to take off and I don't want to ever hinder him.
Fair enough. Well, look, Drakova, you have done so amazingly well today. I had such a blast talking to you. Like I said, this chat went on about 3 times longer than I was planning just because you were so engaging as a person. And again, I just want to double down on thank you so much for sharing that story with us about yourself and getting access to your photos that you sent through, the before and after and the weight loss. I just want to say a huge congratulations to you. That's absolutely inspiring to hear. And it's so great to be able to speak to you after I've heard about you for a while now and was sort of wondering where I could maybe get in touch with you. And it was so nice of you to agree to come on the show. So look, I had a blast. If you're ever up for speaking, with me on the show again, I'd love to have you. I've got to run to work now, but mate, I just want to throw out the biggest thank you so much again. And
Red Paladins are pretty good, guys. Stay us full and good luck.
Absolutely.
They're pretty good. Not amazing. They're pretty good.
Out of interest, where can people find you online these days if they are trying to get in touch with you or have a chat with you?
They can't. Wait till Classic. I'll be everywhere.
All right. Thanks so much, mate. We'll talk to you later.
All right. Bye. Good luck.
Hi everyone, Josh here. I just want to take a quick moment to remind you that while Countdown to Classic will always be a podcast you can get for free, if you do happen to really enjoy the show and find yourself always coming back for more, then please Do check out the show's Patreon page to see how you can help keep the lights on at Countdown to Classic, and even vote on show content as the show continues to bring you more and more classic WoW goodness. Alternatively, if monthly subscriptions aren't your thing, you can always visit the show's tip jar over at Ko-Fi, with that link being in the show notes and on the website too. Now, let's get back to the show. All right, we've got another whole bunch of Countdown to Classic listeners on the line, and a couple of repeat listeners who we've just heard very recently on the show, but I feel like there were some very important points raised that we had to dive back into a little bit deeper. So please do say hello. Ale, welcome back.
Great to be here.
And Fred Munro, as always, welcome back.
Thank you so much. Good to be back.
And finally, we've got a third listener on the line, another Countdown to Classic first-timer, but someone who sent me a very, very detailed email through the week, who picked up on a point that Fred had made earlier on the show, and we figured we'd get everyone together to hash it out, really, given a little bit of technical expertise between the three of you. Please do say hello, Lord Byron.
Thanks for having me on.
My absolute pleasure. Thanks for calling in. Now, look, just to give all the listeners a little bit of a insight into why we're doing this call, and people might be saying, hey man, we just heard from Ale. We just heard from Fred Munro. Give other people a chance. And I say, wait, these people have some very important information to get out there. And that's piggybacking off of a point that Fred Munro made on the show recently. And by the time I play this, it probably will have been 2 episodes ago. I think that Fred put it a little bit of fear in people's minds somewhat if you wanted progressive itemization in the game, because you picked up on a few things that were said during the panel, and you read between the lines and said, they have told us that the 1.12 data is considered sacrosanct and they don't want to meddle with it. You don't think progressive itemization is coming. You also don't think, quite frankly, that they have the data on hand. Lord Byron sent me a very similar email, having not actually heard that episode yet. He hit me up and said, hey Josh, have you noticed a few things that happened during the panel and a few things that were said? I don't think these guys can even do progressive itemization because, quite frankly, I don't think they've got the databases. And Lord Byron has a fair bit of experience in the industry and working with databases, so we'll touch on that, on his reasons why we think we're going to crack this little conspiracy as to what info Blizzard does or does not have. And then, flowing on from that, we've got Ale. Now, if you're in the Countdown to Classic Discord, Ale and Fred Munro had a phenomenal back and forth about this very issue, and it's in the Show Talk channel on the Discord. Please do go back and listen to it, or, search for it, given that this episode might be playing in a couple of weeks' time. It was absolutely amazing to watch, and Ale actually disagreed. Ale said, well, I feel like I'm going to need a little bit more proof to convince me that they don't actually have the data to push forward with progressive itemization. So it's interesting that we will get the two sides of the coin argument here, and who knows, we might convince Ale by the end of the call, or the other way around. So we'll see where it all goes. We've got 1v2 essentially, and me moderating, and this discussion could get very technical. So you might not hear from me as much. I'll jump in and try and direct the conversation where I can, but it's very much so going to be the three of these guys, hyper intelligent people who have seen and heard some things and drawn their own conclusions, will just be taking it away and gossiping amongst themselves. So here's what I'll do to kind of light this fire, everyone. Fred Munro, we'll start with you, as I do like to do. You brought up the points and you started going back and forth with Ale. Why don't you talk about that conversation a little bit, and if Ale gave you any food for thought against your arguments that we heard on the show before?
Sure. So just to confirm for people who are interested in looking at the conversation, it was on Tuesday, and that is Tuesday the 13th of November 2018. I don't know when you're listening to this conversation, but Tuesday the 13th, 2018, and that was at 7:45 p.m. if you're really searching for it, and that's Eastern time. Okay. Anyway, so the conversation basically started with, Ale listened to the call and he was, wanted to push back a little bit on the points, that I'd made. So basically there was 2 premises that I was starting with that I think we could get from the BlizzCon talk. The first premise was, well, they don't really have access to pre-1.12 data. And the second premise was they also don't want to change 1.12 data. And so with those two premises, it's like, well, if the itemization is in fact the data, then they're basically saying we don't have that data, and even if we did, we don't want to change it from the 1.12 version. AOL in particular was thinking that they might actually have that data because of their data policies, and I'll let AOL talk a little bit more about that.
My thinking was that it's possible, based on their Restoring History, Creating WoW Classic talk, that they may actually have that data available. In the talk, they only had mentioned that very early on they had experienced some data loss with their with their database, because at that point, in the example they used was 1.2 to 1.3. They had, at that time, were overwriting data, so they did have some data loss. What had kind of made me think of this is the way that private server databases store their progressive itemization, where it can be debated whether it's a good practice or not. They actually have all revisions in one database, and the way that they had talked about in the Restoring History is that they could potentially roll back their database. They said 1.12 and a little bit before. They had only mentioned that in their example that they had overwritten 1.2 and 1.3, and they fixed it up shortly after. So kind of based on those points, I feel like it's possible that they do have that data. And considering I think that most of the progressive itemization happened a little bit later, like I think 1.4 and on, I think it could leave it open to interpretation.
Okay. Now, Lord Byron, you're someone, as I mentioned, who took the same stance as Fred Munro, and in particular, you drew my attention to a specific moment in the classic panel where Omar Gonzalez is going through a few things, and they put up a slide of, what looked like a clock and going back through time through the different patches. And you picked up on a particular point. So I'll get you to explain that a little bit further, just the little intricacies that you picked up on while that talk was going on. But what I'll do first is I'll actually play the 45-second clip that's relevant to this. So just listen to this first, and then we'll get your comments on it, Lord Byron.
Next up, I want to talk about how we worked with our database data. Now, to shed a little bit of light, early on, we only had really a simplistic model. There were two versions of the game. There was the version that was live and available to the public, and the next patch that we were working on. Once we were ready to release that patch, we would push it to the live services and make it available to everyone. Now, we would immediately then turn around and start working on the next patch, but we were doing it directly over the previous data. This had the unfortunate side effect of some amount of data loss in some of these earlier patches. We also encountered other problems here in that the team could only ever work on one patch at a time. This was quickly rectified, and we're now able to work on multiple patch schemas at a time. So when going back and looking at our database data, we took our clock, we cracked open this database and said, how far back do you still have data for? Fortunately, we still had patch 112 and slightly before. So this gave us sort of a medium level of confidence in our ability to restore original database data.
Having heard that again, Lord Byron, and jogging the memory a bit, what is it about what was said there and what was seen there that really piqued your interest?
It was those words slightly before and what those mean. Because to me, that means you're at least going 2, maybe 3 patches back, and that's it, no farther. So if at most, and that's where the linchpin of my premise sits at. So if you can't go back any farther than 1.9, let's say even 1.8, you still are missing so much data for itemization because a lot of it started in 1.4, 1.5, all the way up through the big changes in 1.10. So I think they have some of it, but they don't have all of it, and they're the source of truth. So if you don't have a source of truth to look at from a big company standpoint, you're kind of out of luck with what you have to work with. And that was the big thing I picked up on, was that slightly, just a few versions back. And so that's what really concerned me.
Okay. Now, Ale, I'll just come back to you real quick because you actually dived into a little bit of what the general practice is when writing databases within the gaming industry. So if I could just get you to explain your understanding of that and also how you feel Blizzard may have handled this and what they may have on hand. Because what I'll do is I'll turn to Lord Byron next and I'll come back to you, Fred, because Lord Byron, you're someone who has a fair bit of experience in the IT industry. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
And you've worked with databases a fair bit. Is that right?
In general.
Yep. So, but you have a loose understanding of how they work and how the gaming industry might sort of implement them.
Exactly. I'm the guy who supports what they run on and making sure that they work and having a general understanding of all the different types and all of that.
Okay. So, Ale, I'll turn to you. Why don't you kick off with your sort of summary of what might go on and why you think there's still hope for progressive itemization?
Well, my hope rallies around the point that I think that they could potentially roll it back further, all the way back to the point where they were overwriting data. And that's kind of where it matters, depending on where that point is. Because they did mention that at the start of the clip you played, that early on they were overwriting data, so there is some data loss. And the example they used was, like you said, 1.2, 1.3. Who knows if that's actually accurate or if it's just, them pulling numbers out of a hat, that they could potentially have that data.
Okay. So you mentioned in the Discord that generally, when creating these databases in game, when we're putting in weapons, information or, armor values, boss values, things like that, that typically when a database is created, they will not overwrite things. They will just create a new version and always have the old version as a reference. Is that right?
That depends on how much the data is changing between versions, say. So potentially, for example, with the private servers, because they do progressive itemization, they do have that full history of everything in one database, so they don't need total separate database versions. It's really tough to say how Blizzard had set theirs up. It kind of feels like maybe they don't have it set up that way. Lord Byron, what do you think about that?
So this is where I could really pull out my tinfoil hat once I started thinking about this, and I had to put pieces together from a lot of different sources. So when John Stats was on, we all kind of got a pretty good understanding of how more or less loosey-goosey they were when they were first getting vanilla set up and ran, and then how crazy it was after launch. And that just kind of proves that point there when they were talking about that patches, 1.3 overriding 1.2. Just how little of a standard change control process that they have. In the industry, you typically have to go in front of a committee, say this is what we're potentially changing, have that written down in a separate document format, and then have that approved where, we can see even with this database changes that they were making here, they were just straight up overwriting it. And so because you're putting that piece together and then you're putting the big fact of what we've been told all throughout these years that they can't make it because they don't have the data. And so if that supposition is supposed to be true, then we're not sitting well because they don't have the data in the database, or they don't have it all. They have some of it, but they don't have the starting values on some of it, what they need as well. And so if we can't fully rely on the database that they have, and we have no other source of truth for data, then we have to look at documentation. And from what we heard from John Stats, that's probably not much.
Okay. I wonder if it's the kind of situation where, like you mentioned, because they don't actually have the full, 1.1 all the way through, that they wouldn't even consider it due to their early practices of actually having overwritten some data. And if they couldn't do it fully, even though a lot of the major, progressive itemization does happen later, maybe they have to have all of the pieces directly in order. And one of the really interesting things that was also said later in that talk is they only have the art assets from 1.12 final. They don't have any art assets going before that point. So how those would line up with the earlier data, maybe that also kind of lends credence to, them not having the full picture of, the example they had was those three pieces fitting together, right?
Well, exactly. And we'll just take an item, and I'll use SFan's favorite Onslaught Girdle. That came in patch 1.5. So patch 1.5, that gets thrown into the game. So if somebody is going to go from the programming team and find out, okay, if we're going to have progressive itemization, we need to find the original data of this item, and then we need to find the values of this item after it changed. How would you do that? You'd go to the database version 1.5, look at the value, and then check all the other database versions and see if it's different, and then if the item changed or not. But if you don't have all of the data to check against, you don't know if it really did change or not, because you kind of need the whole scope of the data to know. Otherwise, you're making a best guess effort. And maybe they're willing to do that, but with Blizzard Polish, I don't know if they are.
Not to mention the amount of work that would take to do that is probably huge, right? Like there's 12 patches. That would be, I wouldn't say it's 12 times the work, but it's significantly more than picking one patch and staying with that.
Well, thankfully, there are automated tools that will go through and just spit out the whole chunk of data that says these are all the things that changed and this is what they changed to. But you have to run that against everything to have a valid conclusion on what all changed. Otherwise, you're just getting half the picture. And if Blizzard is willing to do that, that would be wonderful, because I really want progressive itemization. But from how much they have their Blizzard polish, I'm just afraid that they're not willing to do that.
Well, that was something that I actually wanted to ask you, Lord Byron, I just had presumed, given, how lengthy your email was about your sort of tinfoil hat about all this stuff, how much do you want are you for or against progressive itemization, and how badly do you want it? And it sounds like that you do want it quite badly. If I can just ask you and probe a little bit deeper, why do you want it so badly, and why do you think it's so important in WoW Classic?
Oh, it'll definitely trivialize content. If you, let's take SFan's Onslaught Girdle item, for example. That's released in MC in patch 1.5, and then that is one of the best girdles, belt pieces you can get all the way up. I think it's until Nax. So that trivializes, ZG, AQ, and the Green Dragons all the way up to patch 111 to Nax, which, it's just kind of rough.
Well, would you say it trivializes it, or that's just one particular slot that it's a bit unfortunate that you won't be upgrading anytime soon? I'm just trying to play devil's advocate here.
That is just one particular slot, but then there's all sorts of items like that all throughout those patch releases that can potentially just trivialize and make the game much easier than it was intended to be. Yep.
And especially for DPS.
Exactly. I want to be able to go back through and know that I defeated everything on the original difficulty level that it was, and I accomplished it as hard as it possibly could be.
Okay. Fred, I'll turn back to you. Has anything that the guys have said and exchanged there sort of raised your eyebrow or made you think any differently?
Regarding that trivialization point, I think that is one of the two major reasons why you are in favor of progressive release, or at least for items, is because you want the difficulty to be harder, and then also because you want to incentivize people to rerun dungeons. Like, if you have DM out after the level 60 dungeons, for example, that gives you a reason to run, to Stratholme, to Scholomance, and then go to DM afterward once that comes out, a few patches later. And then if you have the patch 1.10 items, maybe you want to go back to Stratholme and Scholomance later again to get the patch 1.10 items. So it is a way of increasing the content and the replayability of the game to have progressive itemization. So I think that's an important point. And the trivialization point is important as well, although I will say that I'm a little confused by the example, because as you pointed out, Onslaught Girdle came out in 1.5. ZG is 1.7, BWL is 1.6, AQ is 1.9. It doesn't exactly trivialize that content to have Onslaught Girdle in the game, because in actual vanilla, it was in the game prior to those patches and that content coming out.
That item's value changed, I believe, in patch 110, but the item came out in patch 1.9. Yeah, sorry about that.
Right. So yeah, obviously if it's using better stats than it had when that content was actually out, then it would make that content easier than it actually was, at least in a progression standpoint. Thank you for clarifying that point. That makes a lot more sense. I was like, what? It was already out. What do you mean it trivializes the content? But if it got buffed, okay, that makes sense to me.
Yeah, because then we have the 1.10 version of the item when we really should be having the 1.5 version of the item.
How about you, Ale? Have you heard anything as of yet that makes you think you can close the door on progressive itemization, or are you still retaining that glimmer of hope?
It is the faintest glimmer of hope. I think really that talk, they really wanted to solidify that they were going to use the 1.12 for the reasons they outlined. And mine was more of kind of a devil's advocate that, just because they say that, this is what they're using, that they might actually have more, kind of just how they went through the talk. It is, at least in my mind, a little bit open to that, but there may be more reasons why, they aren't going to do that.
Well, what's your opinion, Ale, on the second point, which is that even, let's just suppose, actually for argument's sake, that they do have access to that data. Do you think it goes against their statement, all their statements about how, we're not going to make balance changes, and, the 1.12 data is sacrosanct, and we don't want to open Pandora's box? They've said those are all like quotes from them. Like, do you think that it goes against those statements to actually implement progressive items, given that, the items that maybe are 1.12 items, that might, do you think it's changing the data to do progressive itemization? Let me put it that way.
Only as it means to keeping the 1.12 data sacrosanct. Like the data itself, if they have it for those versions, like they could be sacrosanct if they implemented it, right? Like it would stay as it is as it progressed. But based on what they said, it sounds like 1.12 is it.
I agree with that interpretation, actually, Fred. This is the one point of this call that I might be able to sound somewhat intelligent on. But I'll say that when they did get up on that stage and they said, look, we consider the 1.12 data sacrosanct, I'm with you, Fred, and this seems to be your take as well, in that I think that does rule out progressive itemization because they don't particularly care if an item's values did change over time. The fact that it was changed means they felt that it was perhaps wrong or unbalanced, earlier for 1.12 content, and thus whatever state it was in 1.12 is how it was intended in what they call, the most polished version of the game. So they consider that gospel, that's how it should be. It's sacrosanct. We don't want to touch it. No progressive itemization. That's what, we always wanted it to be. And just like we fix classes over time, we quote unquote fixed items over time to be workable for the content as it was in 1.12. Does any of that make sense? I hope it does.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying the point. Yeah, I mean, that is the point, basically, right? I remember because this is sort of the discussion that we were having in the Discord on it, which was, I don't know if you still hold this stance, but you were saying, well, it might not go against, that statement to change the data because it's actually there, right? If within the 1.12 database, they have the 1.6, item of some item, then if they implement that 1.6 stat, they're not changing the 1.12 data because the earlier data is in that newer 1.12 data. I think that was the point you were trying to make. I disagree with that interpretation, but is that a correct sort of, is that what you were trying to say?
Yeah, that could be kind of like I think we're saying like a lawyered moment where it's the 1.12 database could potentially have the itemization from earlier patches, depending on how they stored that data.
If they stopped that practice of overriding things.
Correct. And it's when they stopped it. That's the key thing, a key piece of info. We know it's at least past 1.3. And that's where, if we could get clarification, that would tell us a lot. But at least we know that we don't have 1.3 or before.
All right. Well, if I could just sort of get to you, Lord Byron, just to maybe take us down the home stretch here and sum up. In terms of what the guys have said so far, are you still keeping the door somewhat ajar for progressive itemization, or do you think it's just done and dusted, we're not getting it?
I'm still hopeful, but I do think there's hope on another front. I've been chewing on this for quite a while now, so let's go under the assumption that we're going to have no progressive itemization. We do know we're going to get a staged rollout. So this more or less becomes a logic puzzle I've been chewing on. Is there a way we can do content release to not trivialize later content? And I've been working on more or less some suppositions and rules that you can use to then work through that logic puzzle.
Yeah, what have you tinkered with? What have you come up with?
So if you have, and I'll just run through this real quick. There are no particular order. So content pieces must be released in their chronological order. And there is kind of one exception to that. That's the honor system and battlegrounds. That can kind of be moved around a little bit from once I started playing with this. So the second point is no content can be released before another piece of content if its items trivialize a future stage of content.
Mm-hmm.
And so if a piece of content does trivialize another piece of content, then they must be released together. So that's how you're going to end up creating the certain set of stages is if you know that releasing that piece of content is going to trivialize something in a later stage, just group them all together and have them all released in that particular stage. And if an item, and then point 3 is if an item was in the same patch, that piece of content was in the same patch, then they need to be released in that same stage of content. And so the goal then at that point is what is the largest amount of content releases you can possibly have following those rules? Because then we know our theoretical maximum amount of stages we can have between the 4 stages they proposed, and then how many we can theoretically have, and then hopefully we can meet in a middle ground with Blizzard somewhere in between to keep progressive itemization to a compromise, at least between them and us, to keep the game engaging and the difficulty level higher.
Yep. So what did the final answer look like?
I'm still chewing on it.
Oh, I see. Sorry. I thought the table might have been sitting there in front of you. No worries. Well, no, that's interesting. I mean, it's definitely, once you lay down the laws and sort of start tinkering with that, it obviously, I think, would mix up what Blizzard proposed to us a little bit. Ale, Fred, any comments on that one?
I just want a little bit of clarification on what you mean by trivialize. You just mean like to make it easier than it actually was in live? Is that what you mean by that word?
Correct. Yes, to make easier than it was intended at that point in time when it was originally released in that patch cycle.
And that's okay. And so the theory is, well, we're going to gate dungeons or raids that provide items. So you're assuming the stats on the items will always stay the same. So it'll always be 1.12 items, but you can gate content so that item is inaccessible. Is that the theory?
Correct. So if you know something's going to trivialize, if an item is going to drop that can trivialize a later piece of content, then you want to make sure to bunch that chunk of content together in just one of the stages. And then you also want to try and separate out everything as much as possible so that you increase the longevity and the difficulty level of the game so that you keep progressive itemization at least somewhat time gated for people to kind of chew on and work their way through.
So that would be like not having Dire Maul with Molten Core, not having ZG with Molten Core, kind of layering those out.
Exactly. But then like the Silithus, following the rules, you need to have Silithus and AQ together because those released on the same patch cycle. But where it gets fun is when you start asking the questions like, should the rank 14 weapons and gear that you get from ranking, where should that be placed? Because that trivializes some content. So do you need to wait for that for a later patch cycle, or do you throw that into an earlier one? And then what about that Onslaught Girdle? Where do you, with that piece of gear, where do you throw that into the mix for, I forget what dungeon that drops in now.
Onslaught Girdle?
Yeah.
Ragnaros.
And so then you get fun items like that. So, and that's a linchpin that breaks the whole set of rules there because that's one of the very first raids and that takes you all the way to Nax. So where do you throw that in and still try and keep it separate? It's a big logic thought puzzle.
Absolutely. Well, look, Lord Byron, you'll have to get back to us once you think you've worked that one out because I'd love to hear what your suggested final solution is. But, look, everyone, I want to thank you so much for, sort of, walking around, in this playground that the three of you have kind of designed with the tinfoil hats on. I think it's a lot of fun to ponder whether or not progressive itemization will still be coming our way. But, as always, I'll wind it up here because I don't want to keep you guys all night. But, Ale, thank you so much again, as always, mate.
Thank you so much.
And Fred, I'll thank you.
Thanks.
And Lord Byron, I'll thank you. And I'll just ask in general, has anyone's minds changed at all, or are you pretty much all keeping the same stance that you had coming into it?
I thought it was doom and gloom. I still think it's doom and gloom.
Okay, fair enough. Lord Byron?
Yeah, I'm kind of at that point. I'm really hoping the community can help with the stage released content to help mitigate some of the risks that we're going to see with this. I know I'm not the master on itemization and what was released when, so I'm really hoping somebody from the community can just really run with that and see what they can come up with for the stage release content. Right.
And Ale, as you said, you're still holding on to that glimmer of hope.
Yeah, a little glimmer. It's definitely worsened since our talk on Tuesday. Fred Monroe really laid the smackdown on me, so.
All right. Well, thanks to all of you guys. We'll see you next time. Hi, everyone. Did you know that the vast majority of callers that you hear on Countdown to Classic are residents of the Countdown to Classic Discord? Please do come and check us out. Outside of that, if you want to hear more from me, then follow me on Twitter at Count2Classic with the number 2. I've also started streaming regularly, and you can find me on Twitch at Countdown to Classic. So please do come hang out and have some fun over there. If you want to call into the show, give feedback, or submit a memory lane or anger management of your own, then email me at feedback@countdowntoclassic.com. Now, let's get back to the show. And that's it for today's calls, and thanks so much again to everyone who called in for those great chats. I really do appreciate it. Now, for this next segment of the show, the Countdown to Classic patrons have had their vote for the week, which are one of the perks that they enjoy. And when asked about which piece of lore they wanted for this episode, they chose between the following 3 options: Sunken Temple, Scholomance, and Ragefire Chasm. And it was those 3 because I was really in the mood to cover an instance. And so, without further ado, as pieced together from the always amazing Wowpedia website, I give you the lore of Scholomance in the latest installment of That's Lore Like It. The Scholomance. And yes, we're going with Scholomance, not like in an earlier episode when I said Schoolomance, because I did actually read that somewhere where someone said, well, it's a portmanteau of school and necromancy, so Schoolomance should be the correct pronunciation. But screw it. Scholomance is what I always used to say. It's what my gut says. It's what everyone else says. So Scholomance. That's what we're going with. Okay, so the Scholomance. Blizzard's official World Dungeon site described Scholomance as the following. The Scholomance is housed within a series of crypts that lie beneath the ruined keep of Caer Darrow. Once owned by the noble Barov family, Caer Darrow fell into ruin following the Second War, as the wizard Kel'Thuzad enlisted followers for his cult of the damned. He would often promise immortality in exchange for serving the Lich King. The Barov family fell to Kel'Thuzad's charismatic influence and donated the keep and its crypts to the Scourge. The cultists then killed the Barovs and turned the ancient crypts into a school for necromancy, known as the Scholomance. Though Kel'Thuzad no longer resides in the crypts, devoted cultists and instructors still remain. The powerful leech, Raz Frostwhisper, rules over the site and guards it in the Scourge's name, while the mortal necromancer, Dark Master Gandling, serves as the school's insidious headmaster. So, we're going to start our story about Scholomance in what may seem like an odd spot, but trust me, it all ties together in the end, so here we go. Following the Second War, Orc Shaman Ner'zhul was on the run through Draenor from the pursuing Alliance expedition of the Sons of Lothar. He escaped the planet through a portal, which resulted in a destructive shattering of the Orcs' homeworld, leaving it in pieces as what came to be known as Outland. But that's a story for another day. Calling in an unpaid vendetta, Kil'jaeden the Deceiver, a powerful Eredar demon lord and the second in rank of the Burning Legion, found Ner'zhul within the Twisting Nether, and, seeking vengeance against the shaman's defiance in previous dealings that we won't get into, tortured the orc for an impossibly long time, destroying his body piece by piece until finally nothing remained but the shaman's tortured soul. Kil'jaeden kept Ner'zhul's spirit intact and aware. Ner'zhul begged for death, but Kil'jaeden said he still had a purpose to serve. He offered Ner'zhul one last chance to serve the Burning Legion or face eternal torment. When the orc recklessly agreed, Kil'jaeden encased his spirit in a block of diamond-hard ice from the distant reaches of the Twisting Nether. Encased within the frozen cask and warped by the Demon Lord's chaotic powers, Ner'zhul felt his consciousness expand 10,000-fold, and he became a spectral being of unfathomable power, the Lich King. The Lich King was sent to Azeroth through the Great Dark Beyond, landing in Northrend, where the ice that encased him formed into the shape of a throne. Here, he would begin the formation of the Undead Scourge, and in the process weaken the world in preparation for the Burning Legion. This new army would not fall victim to the petty infighting that had caused the orcs to fail in conquering Azeroth earlier. Sent to watch over him were the Dreadlords, led by Tichondrius himself. Within the Frozen Throne, the Lich King experimented with his new psychic powers and enslaved the local indigenous life forms. The plague of undeath that came from the Frozen Throne transformed each of them into his undead servants. Thus, using his psychic and necromantic powers, he was able to conquer much of Northrend. As he devoured more and more souls, he only grew in power, as the individual undead under his control gave him much needed nourishment. Thus, his powers began growing at an exponential rate, a fact that the Dreadlords were well aware of. After 10 long years of consolidation, the Lich King's actions finally drew the attention of perhaps the Scourge's only equal on the continent, the Nerubian Empire. In an effort to end the Lich King's bid for dominance of the continent, the Nerubians, an insectoid race descended from the Akir, an ancient sentient insectoid race from Kalimdor that we've touched on earlier, dispatched a section of their most elite warriors to assault Ner'zhul's base in Icecrown. This force engaged the undead scourge in the region, but the Lich King soon discovered, to his frustration, that the Nerubians were virtually immune to both the plague of undeath and his potent telepathic powers, which had proved so effective against Northrend's other denizens. The insectoids possessed a vast network of underground tunnels and caverns which stretched the breadth of much of the continent, and which the Nerubian leaders now used to their advantage against the undead. Deploying their vast forces in hit-and-run tactics as opposed to pitched battles allowed the Lich King's assailants to neutralize many of his strongholds without running the risk of being rooted out. Despite these successes, however, the practically limitless numbers of undead at Ner'zhul's disposal proved impossible for the Nerubians to overcome, and soon the Lich King struck back against the subterranean kingdom. Eventually, the Scourge launched a large invasion of the Nerubians' underground nation led by the Lich King's powerful Dreadlords. The insectoids were forced back under the relentless assault, with many of their temples and structures being brought down on their heads. Although the Nerubians had proved resilient to the plague, the Lich King was still able to use his powers to raise them in undeath once they had been slain on the battlefield. During the fighting, the Nerubian Empire's king, Anub-Arak himself, was killed and subsequently raised by the Lord of the Scourge. Along with several of his lieutenants, the former ruler of the Spider Kingdom now slaughtered many of his former brethren at Ner'zhul's command. Impressed by the insectoids' tenacity and fearlessness, the Lich King even adopted many of their architectural designs for his own fortresses and structures. During this dire battle in the Nerubian capital, a new threat emerged from Azjol-Nerub's deepest reaches. In an effort to replace ground lost to the undead, the Nerubians dug progressively deeper into the earth. In doing so, they inadvertently uncovered the Faceless Ones, minions of the ancient old gods. These monsters, in the service of their master Yogg-Saron, one of the 4 old gods of Azeroth, attacked the Nerubians with immense ferocity. Now fighting a desperate war on 2 fronts, what was left of the Nerubian Empire collapsed and was overwhelmed by its enemies. The fall of the Spider Kingdom marked the conclusion of the War of the Spider. In the period following the conflict, the Scourge made an effort to raise from the dead the many Nerubians who had fallen in battle. Such was the size of their numbers that they significantly bolstered the undead ranks in the form of Crypt Fiends and Crypt Lords, and played a major role in the Lich King's armies in the wars to come. The Lich King, now fully unopposed to rule the entire continent of Northrend, began making preparations for his assault on Azeroth's other inhabitants as the Dreadlords urged Ner'zhul to proceed with the agreed-upon plan to prepare the world for the invasion of the Burning Legion. Thus, the Lich King turned his attention south to kill Jaden's chosen targets, Kel'Thuzad and Lordaeron. Though he was trapped bodiless and confined to the Frozen Throne, the Lich King could reach out telepathically across great distances to those seeking power and knowledge of necromancy. His first minions and the beginnings of the Cult of the Damned. Chief among the men and women who heard the Lich King's call was Kel'Thuzad. So, just a very quick reminder about Kel'Thuzad, who we featured on the show very early on, all the way back in episode number 2, when we talked about the lore of Naxxramas. Kel'Thuzad was a powerful human archmage and a member of the Kirin Tor of Dalaran, an elite cadre of the most powerful wizards in the known world. Forsaking his position as a senior member of the Kirin Tor, Dalaran's ruling council, Kel'Thuzad travelled alone to Northrend to heed the Lich King's call. His arrival was expected. Kel'Thuzad began to believe that allying himself with the mysterious Lich King would not only be wise, but potentially fruitful. Kel'Thuzad was in awe of the entity. He saw firsthand the scope and ferocity of Ner'zhul's power in seeing the vast Nerubian ruins left decimated by the War of the Spider. Kel'Thuzad also met the conquered ruler, Anub-Arak. He even observed the terrors that lay within the corrupted ziggurat called Naxxramas. It was more than he had bargained for. Kel'Thuzad briefly thought to escape, but the Lich King's servants made it very clear that the time for second thoughts had passed. Kel'Thuzad would serve the Lich King. The only choice left to him was whether he would do so alive or undead. Kel'Thuzad was forced to crawl to the Frozen Throne in Icecrown to accept his reward. The Lich King promised that loyalty would be repaid with power beyond imagining. Kel'Thuzad confirmed his desire to ally with the Lich King, and he offered his soul to Ner'zhul. The Lich King was pleased with his latest conscript. He promised Kel'Thuzad immortality and great power in exchange for his loyalty and obedience. Eager for dark knowledge and power, Kel'Thuzad accepted his first great mission, to go into the world of men and found a new religion that would worship the Lich King as a god. To help the Archmage accomplish his mission, Ner'zhul left Kel'Thuzad's humanity intact. The aged yet still charismatic wizard was charged with using his powers of illusion and persuasion to lull the downtrodden, disenfranchised masses of Lordaeron into a state of trust and belief. Then, once he had their attention, he would offer them a new vision of what society could be, and a new figurehead to call their king. Kel'Thuzad returned to Lordaeron in disguise as a holy man, and over the span of 3 years he used his fortune and intellect to gather a clandestine brotherhood of like-minded men and women. The brotherhood, which he called the Cult of the Damned, promised its acolytes social equality and eternal life on Azeroth in exchange for their service and obedience to Ner'zhul. As the months passed, Kel'Thuzad found many eager volunteers for his new cult amongst the tired, overburdened labourers of Lordaeron. He won over the lower classes with demagoguery, playing on their disillusionment with Lordaeron's government. He proclaimed that he could ease the pain of the downtrodden and give hope to the hopeless and lead the destitute to eternal life. The lies came easily to him. He had seen the power of undeath. Now that he was bound to the Lich King, he no longer feared it. He even hungered for the day when he could cast off the shackles of life and ascend to a greater undead form. For the rich, Kel'Thuzad took a different approach. He enticed nobles and landowners with offers of great power and immortality if they joined his cause. Some voiced concern about what seemed like a people's movement, geared toward toppling the established order. But Kel'Thuzad eased their fears. He said the lower classes were no threat. They were simply a tool that the privileged could use to destroy their rivals and secure more wealth. As the years passed, Kel'Thuzad recruited more and more people to his cause. Few truly understood the horrors that awaited them all. Only individuals whom he was certain he could turn to darkness learned the truth about the plague of undeath and what it could do to humanity. It was surprisingly easy for Kel'Thuzad to achieve his goal, namely to transfer the citizens' faith in the holy light into belief in Ner'zhul's dark shadow. As the Cult of the Damned grew in size and influence, Kel'Thuzad made sure to hide its workings from the authorities of Lordaeron. Around this time, prior to the eventual unleashing of the Plague of Undeath upon Lordaeron, the House of Barov was an extremely wealthy family of humans owning the land which comprised Kae'Darrow, Brill, South Shore, and Tarren Mill. The family consisted of Lord Alexei, Lady Elucia, and their children Jandis, Alexei, and Weldon. The Barovs were one of the most prominent families in Lordaeron, and their island of Kae'Darrow stood as a testament to their wealth and influence in the region. Located on Darrowmere Lake in what's now known as the Western Plaguelands, it was home to a town and a mighty stronghold, a heavily fortified keep owned and operated by the family. The fortress on Kae'Darrow was built long ago by humans. It was also the site where an ancient High Elven runestone was placed. During the Second War, the island was invaded by the Horde, the fortress sacked, and the sacred runestone captured. The stone was hewn into pieces which were used to create the Altars of Storms, arcane structures which allowed Gul'dan to instill magic into the Horde's ogre allies. When Uther the Lightbringer, the first of the 5 paladins of the Knights of the Silver Hand, embarked for the island on a mission of mercy to aid and comfort the survivors of the Bloody Raid, he was ambushed by privateers from Alterac. In the naval battle that followed, some of the sailors were captured. During questioning in Lordaeron's capital, they confessed their nation's treachery to the Alliance, leading to Alterac's eventual ruin. Following the Second War, the fortress at Kae'Darrow was restored. The rule of the island by the Barov family dates back to at least this time. Around 10 years prior to the events of World of Warcraft, Kel'Thuzad arrived on Kae'Darrow. With an eye on the keep as a potential prized location for his burgeoning Cult of the Damned, Kel'Thuzad won over the Lord and Lady of the Barov family with these promises of immortality. Not content with their enormous holdings, the Barovs entered into a deal with Kel'Thuzad, who then turned the once opulent House of Barov into the horrific Scholomance, a school of necromancy where some cultists began to take up residence and study and practice necromancy in the name of the Lich King. How voluntarily Lord Alexei entered the deal is unknown. Within these catacombs beneath what was once the great human fortress, Kel'Thuzad tutored his most loyal cultists in the fine art of necromancy. The dark sorcerers quickly honed their craft. They conducted gruesome experiments, animating the skeletons dug up from beneath the fortress. Some necromancers hacked apart the unearthed corpses and used the pieces to create mindless undead giants called abominations. While this work progressed, Kel'Thuzad occupied himself with the most important experiment. He had brought samples of the Lich King's plague of undeath from Northrend to Scholomance. He worked feverishly to create a strain of the disease that was both effective and subtle. He planned to spread the plague through Lordaeron's grain supplies, and he wanted its incubation period to be long enough that the humans would consume the tainted food before any symptoms surfaced, thus maximizing the number of victims. After many long months, he succeeded. When the Barov family pledged their allegiance to Kel'Thuzad, a massacre occurred and the Barovs were turned into servants of the Scourge. Lord Alexei became an undead death knight whose spirit now actually attempts to cleanse Scholomance of the Scourge. Elucia and Jandis were turned into undead ghosts, and Alexei was assumed to have become a similarly bound undead spirit. Weldon, the only still technically living member of the Barov family, was able to escape from Kel'Thuzad, and sometime after his escape from Kae'Darrow, discovered what had become of his brother Alexei. Alexei was indeed now undead, however, was actually one of the undead that were freed by Sylvanas, and had become a Forsaken. Weldon, upon this encounter, chose to spare his undead brother's life for now, and stayed in the region to side with the Alliance, taking up residence at Chillwind Camp in the Western Plaguelands. Alexei went on to make camp at the Bulwark on the border of the Western Plaguelands and Tirisfal Glades. In-game, Weldon and his now Forsaken brother Alexei are both heirs to the Barov family fortune, which still remains, although it is unknown how exactly they intended to deal with obtaining that fortune, since most of it is probably still buried somewhere within the treasuries of Kae'Darrow. The brothers nonetheless strived for the 4 deeds, documents of right to the 4 Lordaeron townships mentioned earlier that they owned, which were scattered around the crypts of Scholomance. This inheritance made them enemies, and Weldon was willing to stop at nothing to become the only surviving heir to the Barov fortune. Alexei and Weldon Barov both recruit parties of adventurers, one working with the Horde and the other with the Alliance, to search for the deeds on their behalf. It is a hard and arduous task, as some of the deeds are guarded by the most powerful members of the Scholomance teaching body. Since the fall of the Barov family, the island and surrounding lake have become lifeless and still. Only meager fish are still able to survive in the murky waters, and the towering fortress seems to suck hope itself from the surrounding air. Every year or so, new students of the Scholomance can be seen entering the manor, or graduates grimly sulking out. Only ghosts of the town's former inhabitants remain, only visible with the spectral essence given by the manor's former servants. The townspeople seem to be cursed to relive Kae'Darrow's happiest day for all eternity, the visitation of Uther the Lightbringer. The spirits remain, seeking justice for the horrific wrongs committed there. Eventually, Kel'Thuzad executed his plan of having the cult spread the plague of undeath through Lordaeron via plague cauldrons, artifacts which would spread the blight plague over wide areas. These cauldrons were created and placed by the Cult of the Damned in the cities they controlled, beginning in the northernmost reaches of the Kingdom of Lordaeron. The plague spread quickly, wiping out the town's populations and raising them as scourge. Though this was a horror for an unsuspecting citizen, for a cultist, undeath was a welcome reward. When the Burning Legion was defeated at the Battle of Mount Hyjal, the Alliance and Horde were not the only winners. The Cult of the Damned considered the demon's defeat a victory for the Scourge as well. The Lich King was finally freed from the Legion's control, and could begin furthering his own plans using his powerful Death Knight, Arthas Menethil. He already had the greater part of Lordaeron under his control, and he wished to expand his influence. The Cult of the Damned rejoiced in the release of its leader, and continues to serve him, not the Burning Legion, after the war. When Arthas shattered the Lich King's prison and took on the Helm of Domination and the Spirit of Ner'zhul, he created and became what was believed to be the strongest being in the world. The new Lich King not only had the telepathic power of the imprisoned Ner'zhul, but an immensely powerful and mobile avatar in Arthas. The cult vowed to serve this new entity as it did the old, as long as he furthered the efforts of the Scourge. The cult works itself into a frenzy with the thought he may leave his new home in Northrend and grace Lordaeron with his presence someday. Working beside the undead, delving into the dark magic of necromancy, and striving one day to become undead themselves, the Cult of the Damned is truly a frightening organization. The current activities of the Cult of the Damned are unknown. While the cult is certainly still active, spreading its influence among both the Horde and Alliance, its true objective is hidden. The Lich King's next move has yet to be revealed. What is known is that the cult will never tire in its missions to undermine the defenses of the living races through subterfuge and sabotage. So long as the Lich King remains, the hidden hand of the cult will be an ever-present threat to both the Horde and the Alliance. As the only living humanoid boss in Naxxramas, Grand Widow Phaelina is likely a high-ranked member of the cult. Other members include Maleki the Pallid, leader of the mortal Thuzadin in Stratholme. But what of the current denizens of Scholomance? Who awaits adventurers within its terrifying crypts? Well, within Scholomance you can find mobs like bone golems, crypt fiends, ghouls, plagued dragon whelps, shades, skeletal mages, skeletal warriors, skeletons, wraiths, zombies, and plenty of rats as the local critters. You'll also find plenty of Scholomance acolytes, adepts, dark summoners, handlers, necrolytes, necromancers, neophytes, occultists, and students. Alright. You'll also find some mindless undead researchers, tutors, and teachers. Everyone is there. So let's talk about what everyone wants to talk about. Who are the bosses, Josh, you might be asking? Well, let's go through them all one by one, and I hope I've included most of them. I think I've left one or two out, but please feel free to correct me if I get anything wrong. It is hard determining what's in there from vanilla versus what they put in later on in the game in some later expansions, but I'm pretty sure I've got just the vanilla stuff here. So let me know if I get it wrong, though. I'm more than happy to take corrections. First of all, let's start with the Blood Steward of Kurtonos is an elite succubus mini-boss found in the Reliquary in Scholomance, along with Kurtonos the Herald, who's an undead elite who can transform into a gargoyle, though this form was intended to represent a vampire. Long ago, he became the master of Scolomance's Dr. Theolin Krastenov, responsible for many of the atrocities during Krastenov's rule over Scholomance. Kurtonos fed on the blood of his innocent victims. To appease his master, Dr. Krastenov had to provide the gargoyle with more and more blood. In later days, Kurtonos was a rare visitor to Scholomance. The blood of innocence was not easy to obtain around Kaodaro now that most of its inhabitants were dead. Only the ghosts remained, plotting the gargoyle's demise. Given his title and the person who founded Scholomance, Kurtonos was probably the herald of Kel'Thuzad. Fun fact, on the way to the Stratholme live side after clearing the gate trap, you'll see a sign in front of you at the fork in the road. This sign reads, Kurtonos Brothers Funeral Home. It's speculated that Kurtonos once lived in Stratholme before the war. How or if this is connected to his vampirism is unclear, although if he has always been a gargoyle, it probably is not connected to him. It is possible, however, that being a funeral parlour, Cthulhu's fed on the blood of the deceased as his business dealt with them. Next, we've got Lord Blackwood, who was an elite skeleton mini-boss found in Scholomance during the Scourge invasion event only. He appeared as a giant, violet, glowing skeleton with a distinctive sword. He could be found wandering in the room just beyond the Chamber of Summoning. Next, we've got Jandis Barov, an elite human ghost mini-boss. She's a member of the ill-fated Barov family. Jandis Barov was once an archmage of Dalaran and a powerful illusionist. In life, she developed a spell that displayed several images of her body that were nearly indistinguishable from her real form. These images duplicated her actions from different locations, making it nearly impossible for her enemies to find her. It was almost infallible. It's also said that Jandis stewards the blood of innocence from Dr. Theolan Krastanov to Cthulhu the Herald. The Journal of Jandis Barov appears after killing Jandis Barov in Scholomance. It taught tailors how to make fell cloth bags used to hold soul shards. For non-tailors, it reads the following. The Journal of Jandis Barov is filled with rantings and ravings about the undead. Towards the end of the book is what appears to be a tailoring pattern for the creation of a bag of some sort. Your understanding of tailoring is insufficient to decipher the pattern. Next we have Rattlegore, an elite bone golem mini-boss. He's directly under the Great Ossuary, or Plagued Hatchling Room near Jandis Barov's dungeon. Next we have Death Knight Darkreaver, an elite Death Knight that lorded over the Great Ossuary. He spawned after the accursed spirits summoned by the divination scryer were defeated. Once a celebrated paladin, the man who would come to be known as Darkreaver was seduced by the call of the Lich King and became an insidious Death Knight. His corruption spread to his steed, who was transformed into an undead horse. Darkreaver was sent to the Scholomance. In the dungeon below the Great Ossuary, he attempted to bend the spirit realm to his whim, summoning and corrupting spirits to do his bidding. Sigorn Creststrider, a powerful shaman of Orgrimmar, discovered this deviation in the sacred spirit realm. He was searching for a courageous shaman to venture into Scholomance and face Darkreaver. Meanwhile, Lord Grayson Shadowbreaker, a paladin in Stormwind City, wished to redeem Darkreaver's fallen charger and put it to use with a truly devoted paladin. He, like Creststrider, was looking for a volunteer to battle Darkreaver. And correct me if I'm wrong, everyone, I believe that was part, obviously, of the Paladin Mount quest chain, but please yell at me if that's a way off. Next we have Marduk Blackpool, also known as Marduk the Black, who was an infamous Death Knight and brutal warlord of the Scourge. Amongst his many campaigns against the humans of Lordaeron during the Third War, he tore through human forces at the Battle of Darashir, causing great death and suffering with his foul, rune-laden sword. He corrupted the spirit of Joseph Redpath, transforming him into Redpath the Corrupted. With the aid of Redpath's twisted spirit, the Scourge forces overran the town and killed all of its inhabitants. Although the Death Knight continued serving the Scourge, his sword was lost in a battle near Corrin's Crossing. A dwarf captain shattered the sword on his enchanted shield, forcing Marduk to flee the field and winning the day for the Alliance. Marduk's sword sank into the earth and corrupted it, eating a gorge into the land, now known as the Infectus Scar. Sometime thereafter, Marduk became a tutor in Scholomance. He was a partner of Vectus, who researched corrupted dragon eggs in the hopes of creating a plagued dragonflight for their use. He was eventually killed by adventurers. That's us. Vectus is an elite skeletal mage mini-boss and one of the main necromancy teachers of Scholomance. Vectus developed the plagued dragonflight found inside Scholomance, which he got by paying Tinky Steamboil in the Burning Steps money for eggs out of Blackrock Spire. Next up, we've got Raz Frostwhisper, an elite lich of the Scourge and overseer of everything that happened in Scholomance. He watched over and taught all those who rise to the position of Dark Master. He was a lieutenant and favoured pupil of Kel'Thuzad. Raz Frostwhisper was once a human mage from Stromgarde. He was a hedge mage, a rogue wizard that never received his formal training from Dalaran. He was among the first to join the Cult of the Damned, and quickly advanced through its ranks. He turned himself over to the Lich King when the Scourge invaded, in return for immortality. Upon the ground in Stratholme, within the slaughterhouse, Raz Frostwhisper took a dagger to his own neck and cut from one side to the other, all the time with a smile upon his face. His corpse fell onto Menethal's gift, and it is there that the Lich King raised his fallen corpse as another lich, granting him immortality while Leonid Bartholomew the Revered looked on. From then on, he spent his time overseeing the operations in the necromancy school. Magistrate Marduk has a plan to rob the Lich of his powers, return him to his mortal form, and slay him once and for all. He also had an ogre servant, Cormac. It seems that Raz Frostwhisper does not have a phylactery to contain his soul, like most liches. The soul of the fallen can still be found at Menethal's gift, where he rose as a lich. The soul will cling to a keepsake of remembrance from the lich's earlier life, and then to the physical form of Raz Frostwhisper, restoring his mortality. This is one of the few instances of an undead having his mortality restored. Now, I'm so sorry, I keep saying the word lich, and I'm not sure if it's leech or lich or whatever, I don't know, I mostly go with lich, but each to his own. Cormac, who we just mentioned, is an elite ogre necromancer boss. He delighted in summoning forth the souls of the banished dead from Purgation Isle. Cormac was one of the 4 random bosses that must be killed for the left or right piece of Lord Valthalak's amulet for the Dungeon Set 2 questline. He could be summoned in Raz Frostwhisper's room by using the Brazier of Beckoning, and was tougher than he looked. Dr. Theolen Krastanov, also known as the Butcher, an elite human boss in Scholomance. Krastanov is the servant of Kurtonos the Herald and main torturer and provider of bodies and bodily parts for the Scolomance's necromancy experiments. His first victims were recruited from among the household of Kaedarrow. Among them were servants of the Barov family, Eva and Lucian Sarkov. Trapped, tortured, and maimed for months, they vowed vengeance on Krastanov, even beyond the grave. Eva Sarkov describes Dr. Krastanov's tortures. The undead surrounded us, constantly tormenting us with horrifying acts of depravity. Finally, he came. He introduced himself as Dr. Theolen Krastanov. We came to know him as the Butcher. We finally understood what the screams were from. The Butcher exposed us to pain that we did not know existed. He used us in countless experiments to devise a plague. The days turned to weeks. We would have died on that first day had it not been for that cruel bastard keeping us alive through magical means. We feel nothing. Our souls remain here, in limbo. We are unable to leave until our remains are found and spirits laid to rest. Next we've got Lawkeeper Polkelt, an elite zombie mini-boss. Polkelt is one of the 6 mini-bosses that are required to call forth Dark Master Gandling. Polkelt is notable among them in that he is the only one of the 6 that does not drop a Corruptor's Scourge Stone. As we can tell from his name, he was once the Keeper of Knowledge. Knowledge that has sadly been lost, however, as he's now a shambling, unintelligent monster. Next we have Instructor Militia, an elite High Elven mini-boss. Seeing her there may be a mark of power of the Lich King, able to find his underlings even among the High Elves without having to kill or even enslave them. Next we've got Lady Elucia Barov, who is an elite ghost mini-boss found within Scholomance. She was the wife of Lord Alexei Barov, and one of the 6 mini-bosses who had to be killed in order again to summon Dark Master Gandling. Lord Alexei Barov, an elite Death Knight boss. Lord Alexei Barov was the Lord of Kaedarrow, Brill, Taran Mill, and South Shore. He's the father of Alexei, Weldon, and Jandis Barov, and husband of Lady Elucia Barov. Like Jandis and Elucia, he is now an agent of the Scourge found within Scholomance. Alexei Barov is one of the 6 bosses that again must be defeated to summon Dark Master Gandling, blah 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 blah. He also guards the Deed to Kaedarrow, which features in the Barov family fortune quest that we talked about briefly before. Next we've got Dark Master Gandling, the final boss of Scholomance. He is not arguably the most difficult boss there. He is, however, the headmaster of the School of Necromancy, appointed personally by Kel'Thuzad. Okay, so that's everyone. Now, this is a bit of speculation, but it's fun. So, what courses did some of the staff teach? Well, again, as per Wowpedia, we had Dark Master Gandling, the school headmaster and teaching advanced studies. We had Raz Frostwhisper, the school chairman, teaching alchemy. Dr. Theolan Krasinov teaching torture, anatomy and demonology. Lawkeeper Polkert teaching history as well as acting as the librarian. We've got Instructor Militia, occultism and shadow magic. Vectus, arcane magic and the plagued dragonflight. Jandis Barov teaching zombification, corpse control, plague research, and advanced illusions, and Rattlegore teaching reanimation 101. What a class that sounds like. So, what awesome loot was within Scholomance? Well, we've got, obviously, the fact that you would go there for your Dungeon Set 1, also known as the Tier 0 headpieces. But there were also some nice potential upgrades, things like, Ancient Bone Bow, Hammer of Divine Might, Alana's Embrace, a nice little epic cloth chess piece for casters, and of course there was Headmaster's Charge, an epic staff that when used gives party members a buff that increases intellect by 20, making this staff highly sought after for PvP and for raids. In raids it's often used by support characters such as priests and druids, who are less likely than DPS casters to have a raiding epic like the Staff of Dominance. The buff stacks with the arcane intellect buff from mages. However, the staff must remain equipped or the buff will disappear. The drop rate of the staff is subject to uncertainties. The different databases will usually tell you something like anywhere between 0.1 to 0.2%, although it's rumored that the drop rate was changed to 1% in patch 1.10. This staff is useful to all caster classes. Ultimately, as one of the only epic weapons available to a non-raider, this staff will be useful to and rolled on by everyone who might use it. Raiders should again note that the Headmaster's Charge must remain equipped for the buff to remain in effect. Therefore, if you already have an epic of some other kind, especially a plus spell damage staff, you should probably pass this to a support class who is more likely to actually use it during a boss fight. And all of that advice again comes from the lovely Wowpedia website. So if it's wrong, yell at them, not me, although I'm the one reading it back. So yeah, I don't know. I'm confused. Here, I didn't play a caster, as many of you know. Now, a few tidbits about Scholomance. So, according to Romanian legend, a real Scholomance exists by an unnamed lake in the mountains south of the city of Hermannstadt, called Sibiu in Romanian. In Transylvania, this school of black magic is said to be run by the devil, and would accept only 10 students at a time. The 10th would remain to serve the devil as payment for his teachings. The Scholomance in WoW is placed in the middle of a lake, much like its legendary namesake. In Bram Stoker's Dracula, Count Dracula is said to have spent several years training under the devil in the Scholomance. It's referenced in both Stoker's novel and an article titled Transylvanian Superstitions on page 136 of the 19th Century by Emily Gerard. According to early Blue posts, Scholomance was originally thought of as an outdoor, non-instanced area, much smaller where Uther's tomb is now. The designers made it so visually stunning that it was turned into an instance so that it could be moved and enlarged. During the development of classic World of Warcraft, Scholomance was internally known as Keep Micro Dungeon for around half a year before Chris Metzen came in at the very end and named the dungeon Scholomance. Near Mars Frostwhisper is one of 2 alchemy labs known to exist in Azeroth. The other is in Blackwing Lair. However, for the Burning Crusade players, there are alchemy labs in Shattrath City and Sun's Reach. Now, the prefix Kea is Welsh for fort. It's used in the names of several famous Welsh and Irish castles, such as Caerphilly and Caernarfon. The crypt on the north-facing cliff is nearly identical to the tomb of King Barov and Queen Ravenovia from the Ravenloft campaign setting for Dungeons & Dragons. This is just one of several references connecting Scholomance to Ravenloft. Now, how about the difficulty of Scholomance? Well, at release, Scholomance was an extremely challenging dungeon. Typically, the dungeon was raided in 10-man parties, with a difficulty similar to Upper Blackrock Spire. Subsequent patches in the summer of 2006 changed Scholomance drastically. Mobs were weakened slightly, and a great many were removed. However, Scholomance could no longer be run with more than 5 party members. At the time, this Scholo nerf was a common topic for party chat among long-time players. Loot in Scholomance has changed gradually over time as well. Originally, each boss dropped some relatively weak loot. The dungeon waned in popularity as players saw little point in running it after they had completed their quests and acquired their Dungeon Set 1 helm. Blizzard again patched the dungeon. At this point, Scholomance drops a moderate amount of fairly useful items, including a very small chance at the 2 epic items that we mentioned earlier. The rewards available from the Argent Dawn have also broadened through patches. Scholomance is a staple source of Argent Dawn reputation and Scourge Stones. Players seeking Argent Dawn trade skill recipes, resistance enchantments, or armaments of the Dawn often spend a great deal of time in Scholomance or Stratholme. And that's pretty much everything Scholomance, so I do hope you enjoyed that little bit of revision of the lore and the bosses and what we all thought of it and all that jazz. So that's another lore segment done for now. Now that we're done with that, I just want to go through a little bit of quick cleanup on the show. And we start with listener Viv, who you might remember from the last episode talking about warriors. And Viv asked for a quick opportunity to clean up something that he said during that chat. And I'm more than happy to let Viv clarify for you all. So here I am speaking Viv's words, and he says this. One of the answers on the show that I gave has been bugging me because I feel like I had more to say about it and it should have been brought up. If you could maybe put the following in an upcoming episode, Josh, as an addendum to our call, that would be swell. I personally do not subscribe to the notion that warriors are entitled to be overpowered due to their early struggles in the game. Like I said on the show though, I do think that the whole thing is kind of a moot point now because the balance of 1.12 already was what it was in vanilla, and they're recreating that experience. However, one thing I should have said is that it can be argued that warriors aren't actually the best at anything. If Classic followed true patch progression, in fact, warriors would not even be best DPS in early raids due to talent changes that came later. Technically, warriors aren't the best DPS in later raids either. Fire mages consistently beat them in damage meters in later raids. Also, it could easily be argued that the mages are also the best in PvP, from a perspective of self-sufficiency. Warriors are only great in PvP when paired with others. Mages can take on multiple opponents by themselves and have tons of tools to outplay people. If how overpowered a class is a measure by how capable they are without assistance, mages are certainly much stronger than warriors in PvP, as are several other classes. Once Naxx has been out a long time, it's possible we will never see more content added to the game and be in a static game state forever thereafter. Thus, warriors will only be competing for strongest DPS with rogues for a year or so, then mages will be the strongest forever. So I pose to you a counter question. Do mages deserve to be both strong while leveling, strong in PvP, and the best PvE DPS in late game? Why don't I hear anyone talking about nerfing mages? The only reason warriors get so much more hate is because they can fill more than one role in a raid. Does this make them less balanced than other classes? Since it can easily be argued warriors are not the best DPS in the game and not the best PvPers in the game, that leaves only one remaining role that they have the potential to be the best at: tanking. Even that is debatable, since, as Neil and I mentioned on the show, druids are extremely good at threat generation and are worth a raid slot. Since most warriors don't even defense cap themselves in a lot of fights anymore, favoring threat generation from damage instead, it could be argued druids' better innate threat generation makes them the superior choice. Having said all that, even if warriors aren't the best at anything, I'd still play them because they're the most fun to me and fit the type of class fantasy that I enjoy. Now, tell me whether you agree or disagree with any of Viv's points brought up there. I'm more than happy to continue to cover this on the show. But for now, that's the show for the day, everyone. Please stay tuned next week, as Countdown to Classic will be covering how the quote-unquote nostalgia effect may affect your consumption of World of Warcraft Classic, addiction and depression with World of Warcraft and gaming in general, and maybe one or two other assorted topics if I find the time. Perhaps either a brief chat on Diablo or maybe EverQuest and how they relate to WoW players. I've got both of those calls and plenty of other calls recorded and ready to go, so it's just a matter of seeing what fits best in the episode. I'm actually sitting on about 5 hours worth of unpublished calls right now. I've been putting in some work over the weekends, as many of you know, and thankfully that's resulted in quite the bank of calls. So if you've called into the show recently and you're saying to yourself, what the hell, Josh? Share my dulcet tones with the world already. Then please, fear not, I haven't forgotten about you, and every call Countdown to Classic has recorded will hit the air at some point. It just might wait about 2 or 3 weeks at times. So it's time for some thank yous, and thanks to recent patrons Sarah B and Metal Zonny. Thanks so much for signing up to the show's Patreon. Also, a big thank you as always to patrons Connor C, Damien A, Herbert, John H.C, Jamie S, Michael H, Minoru, Randall H, Tim B, Tim S, and Zudamos. And of course, the very dedicated patrons of Countdown to Classic. An extra special shout out for these patrons, and a thank you from the bottom of my heart to Billy C, Fire Spittin' Kitten, Flowsy B, Carl W, welcome on board, thank you for becoming a patron of Countdown to Classic, Nick B, Palfurus, Romani, Tsunami, The Anton, Wilson Ma, and Velarco. Thank you so much to all of you for your phenomenal support of the show. Countdown to Classic would not be the same without your support. But that's it from me for the day, everyone. So signing off from Down Under, have a great rest of the week.